IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I got something special for y'all today. I have been begging this dude right here to come on our show all spring, and we haven't been able to make this the schedule work, but today we made it happen. You all know who that is. That's Tim Prister of Irish Illustrated. Tim, I was actually talking about you on my show the other day because we were looking up a roster to try to, from the Blue and Gold Illustrated magazines, going over the 1990 recruiting class. So I found that magazine and went over that class. Tim, obviously been reading you for a long time, and really happy to have you on with us today.
Coach D, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, Tim, I missed you yesterday. I was hoping to see you yesterday. We got a nice little gift, got our final open full practice of the spring, but it was a lot of the stuff that we had seen before. And so what I wanted to do today, Tim, is just kind of go over everything that we have seen. Like me, you and I watch practice, and it's been nice to be at practice with you this year, by the way. But we also spend a lot of time talking to sources, talking to different people, trying to find out as much as we can about what this football team is. And so we thought, before the spring game, because let's be honest, the spring game is one of the least important things that we'll watch this spring, just where this football team is. So we're just kind of go down through it and just have a little bit of fun and talk about where this team is. I want to start off, Tim, asking you first, because you were at spring practices last year. I had my team there, and I got to see some practice film and things like that, but I wasn't there as much as you guys were obviously last year. I just want to kind of, as you look at this team, year 2 of Marcus Freeman, this new look staff, the roster changes and all that, just give an overall view, Tim, of how you see where this team is relative to where it was a year ago as we were kind of going into the infancy stages of the Marcus Freeman tenure.
Well, first of all, Marcus Freeman is a lot more comfortable at practice. It's like he doesn't have to think about where he's standing or where he should go next. And I think that's pretty obvious that there's a comfort zone there. And, I think he's done in retrospect, I like the changes that have been made in the coaching staff. I think Joe Rudolph is an excellent coach. We all know Harry Hiestand is legendary. I think I'm not sure exactly how Jared Parker is going to do as offensive coordinator compared to Tommy Rees, but I do like Gino Guidugli as a more experienced quarterbacks coach working for Notre Dame, and so I think that's to their advantage. So that's just one thing. But as far as where they are compared to last year at this time, the quarterback room is so different and so much better. And I thought Tyler Buckner, from what I've seen up to this point, and then my staff as well, I just wasn't, last year in August, I just wasn't going to go along with everybody and say, oh yeah, Tyler Buckner's accurate, he's going to be fine, because I didn't see that. I didn't know that. And I think that he's shown some things here this spring that indicates he's more comfortable. I think accuracy is something he's always going to have to battle to some extent.
He's never going to look like Jimmy Clausen.
No. Or maybe for that matter, Kenny Minchie, who comes in as pretty accurate quarterback, but much more comfortable in his skin, much more comfortable in his role. And, I think that's better. I don't think that Sam Hartman has settled in, but that entire group is way better than they were at this time last year. Offensive line, not as experienced at guard, way ahead at wide receiver. And I still think the wide receiver positions have a long, long way to go. I like the tight end group, but you don't have a Michael Mayer. And frankly, you don't have all your personnel because of injuries. Sure. And then the defensive line, it's not as experienced. I had greater question marks about the defensive line going into the spring. And the glimpses that I've seen have been better than I anticipated. But again, look, Brian, there are no finished products on April 13th.
Yes.
And no finished products on the day of the spring game. There's just no such thing. It's better now because you get half of your freshman class in ahead of time. But, it was just a few years ago that, most of your freshmen weren't here until August. I don't even know, or June, I guess. I don't even know how in the world any of those guys could adapt as quickly as they did. But so you get a little better sense of the depth chart nowadays. And I've I like the linebacker core, I think, more than most people that cover Notre Dame.
We had a fun conversation about that
Yeah, I
yesterday.
mean, I think that linebacker play is directly tied to defensive line play, and there were games last year where the defensive line was hammered. And as I always say, it's difficult for a linebacker to make a tackle when when the first contact he's making to make a tackle is his own defensive lineman being pushed back into him.
Yeah.
So, I like that group. We all know that the safety position needs some depth, but I'm really, really very, very bullish on Xavier Watts going into as the spring finishes and going into the year. So, yeah, I don't know, Brian. I mean, it's not a finished product, but the fact that the defensive line and we both have acknowledged that the practices have been the ones that we've been allowed to attend, at least the two full ones, was very blitz heavy, and
Right.
that's tough for an offensive line. I know people think it's coach speak when they say, the unit has to work together, but you have two new guards and a new offensive line
Right.
coach. It just doesn't happen overnight. So nothing has discouraged me. I am a little concerned at the overall development of the wide receiver core, but again, it's very, very early. I know you're a little bit more bullish yourself.
Yeah, just of kind of where I think they'll be, and we'll get into that position specifically. I think the one thing that I will say is I always turn my back and don't watch place kicking because I have to keep reminding myself that they're place kickers not on campus yet because that's been a
And
but
maybe
it
not the punter either.
right, right.
Battle, but
I think another takeaway that I have had, Tim, is I've said this. I don't know what kind of football team they're going to be next year. We're going to find out. It's April, and as a coach, you're always excited about this time of the year, but you're always nervous about this time of the year because, as you said, you don't have your full team together. You have guys out, and it's just the early stages of the development. Spring is not an end all. It's not an end game. There's no end to spring. It's a continuation of the process that begins in January. The one thing I will say confidently is I don't know how good of a team they're going to be. That remains to be seen. I'm excited and optimistic about the team, but my point is this. This is a far more athletic football team, and I'm talking at every across the board, even the offensive line. Are they going to be better than Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg at guard this year? I have no idea. But Billy Shrout's a better athlete than either one of those two guys. I mean, they're going to be more athletic
yeah.
there. They're going to be more athletic at wide receiver. They're going to be more athletic on defense. This, in my opinion. Now, will they be better football players? That remains to be seen. Is Billy Shrout going to be a better football player than Jarrett Patterson? That's a hard thing to ask him to do. Jarrett Patterson's a pretty good football player. But athleticism, I think, is one of the things that I'm encouraged by is when you watch this team play. I mean, we'll talk about the receivers and they're a work in progress, but then you look at them and you say, as to your point, they're still so much better than they were a year ago. And that's the kind of the thing that we'll get into. So I'm bullish on this team, Tim. I am, but we also acknowledging the fact that this is still a work in progress. And there's going to be some guys go out. They're going to go try to dip into the portal again here when we get into May to try to help the secondary, the safety position, stocking that a little bit. So this team's still going to look a little bit different. We haven't seen Boubacar or Mel Mookum. Can they help at all? I have no idea. We haven't seen Devin Houston healthy. We haven't seen Eli. I mean, is Jadarian Price going to be back? I mean, there's just we've seen Logan Diggs once this spring.
Yeah.
And that's kind of partly what makes me excited about this team, Tim, is because we don't see Logan Diggs. Chris Tyree's playing receiver. We don't see Jadarian Price. And what happens? Jabron Payne steps into the mix and says, okay, I got this, and I think that's probably the biggest thing for me is I think the depth of this team, especially on offense, is so much greater now than it was even just a year ago when we're talking about, do they have more than 4 healthy receivers right now? I do not think that they do.
Yeah. And to that point, Brian, the other thing, I mean, in addition to the athleticism, and I agree with you, I love the direction that they're going size-wise along the defensive line. Howard Cross is a good football player, is going to remain a good football player at Notre Dame, but they aren't going to be recruiting 6 foot defensive tackles moving forward. They're getting larger bodies, and I think that's very important from a leverage standpoint, and that's very important. Like you talk about the athleticism on offense at receiver, it's athleticism with size. You're always going to have some smaller receivers, but you're seeing the Colseys and the Merriweathers and people like that. Caleb Smith, maybe we'll talk about him a little bit more. I'm not sure what his future holds at Notre Dame, but yeah, they're the size and athleticism. I don't think
Yeah.
any doubt, and we are seeing depth. Another misconception. It's like, oh my God, they don't have enough bodies at safety. Well, no team in the country has perfect balance at every position. It's just not. It just doesn't happen,
Right.
especially in the spring because you don't have a full complement of players. So no finished products in the spring, but I agree with what you say in terms of the athleticism, and I like the stature of the linemen as well.
Yeah. Tim, we'll dive over to the offense now and just kind of zero in a little bit. I think you said some good things about obviously the coaching position. Uh, you got a
We're
lot
getting
of
a lot
people
of
reaching
things.
out.
I'm not sure how to get rid of that, Brian.
Yeah,
Frankly, without eliminating my wow.
yeah. Everybody's trying to reach out to Tim nowadays. Um, so I think if you go to the notifications or you go to here, I'm gonna put you on mute for a second, Tim, while I kind of load this up and let you figure out how to do that. But if you go to your, I'm not sure what are you on a Mac? Okay, yeah. If you go to pull up your, I think you're getting text alerts, right? So if you just go up there to your message, you should have preferences. You should be able to turn your sound off. You can also go to your main thing and have turn your outgoing volume down, but that might impact obviously or your incoming volume, but that would then impact being able to hear me. So I'll let you work on that a little bit. I got you muted now, Tim. I'm going to kind of set us up for the offense. I think you made some good points earlier when you look at the offense. I think the makeup of the coaching staff is very interesting, and there's two ways to look at it, right? One is to say, well, Joe Rudolph's not as good as Harry Hiestand, and I don't know if Jared Parker's going to be as the coach that Tommy Rees was. Will he be worse? Will he be better? Will it be just the same? We don't have an answer to that question right now. And so I think when you look at the makeup of the coaching staff and say, take away what it was or what it's been compared to and just look at for what it is, we don't know what we're going to get from Jared Parker, but I think the overall makeup is good. Your Dylan McCullough's going into year 2 at Notre Dame. He's one of the best in the business. Jancy Stuckey's going into year 2. He was a huge question mark at this time last year because the guy had only coached for 1 year. What's he going to be able to do? I thought he did a very good job his first year, especially considering what I thought he was walking into and how that unit had been developed or not developed in previous seasons. And then, you look at Jared Parker continuing as a tight ends coach. I think Gino Guidugli, as you said, was a really strong hire, proven track record. And I think it's good for the quarterbacks. I'm someone who believes that an OC can be an offensive coordinator. I have no problem with that. But I also think that there's some merit to where over the next couple of years, it might be beneficial to this group for a host of reasons to have a very dedicated quarterbacks coach. So I feel good about where they are offensively. They're definitely working on some new things. I feel good about it, but I want to kind of dive into the positions, Tim, and we're going to start off with quarterback because obviously this is the position that draws the most conversation. And anytime there's a quarterback battle, you're going to see a million articles written about, the quarterback battle and things along those lines. We'll talk about that, but I think the big thing for me, Tim, is here's what I hope that Notre Dame fans don't do, and we see it. But we gotta get out of this mindset of like being on Team Hartman or Team Buckner, right? Here's the way I look at it: Notre Dame is loaded at quarterback right now, and we'll find out who's going to start: Sam Hartman, Tyler Buckner, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But the reality is, I'm so much more confident now than I was a year ago about where Notre Dame is a quarterback, because I was of the belief that I still felt Tyler Buckner was without question the best quarterback last year because Drew Pine was too limited. Great kid, great leader and all that, but Buckner brought playmaking ability, and if you lost him, your offense was going to be in trouble. This year I look at and say, I think it doesn't matter who starts a quarterback. They're going to have a chance to have a very good football player because Tyler Buckner is ahead of where he was a year ago. That's part of the development process. And I think that's the thing that my big takeaway is: we can obsess over who's it going to be, and none of us have that answer right now. But my confidence level that Notre Dame is going to get playmaking from this quarterback position in some capacity, whether it's as a pure passer like Sam is or as a dual threat guy like Tyler is, the play at quarterback in game 1 this year is going to be significantly better, in my opinion, than it was in game 1 last year, and definitely game 3 to game 12. I think we're going to see, and that's no knock on Drew Pine. He was just a limited player as a first-year starter. I think the play at quarterback is going to be so much better. And you cannot win in college football today, especially at Notre Dame, if you don't have really strong quarterback play. And that's my takeaway is I feel so much better that they're going to have a shot to get that at quarterback, regardless of who ends up starting, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I've never really quite understood a fan cheering against their own players. I mean, I understand that, okay, I think he can be better than this guy. And we have that faction too now that especially now that Buckner had a really good day. We have an obligation to report that we saw
Sure.
he had a really good day. That okay, well, I want Buckner to beat him out. Well, I don't absolutely know what's in the best interest of Notre Dame football 2023 at quarterback, but I'm pretty sure it's with the guy with 13,000 yards and touchdowns.
Right.
I mean, why
Right.
would we want to skip that step when you've been looking for, a trigger man of this degree? Now, I understand that the dual threat option that Buckner
Mhm.
offers, the ability to run. Notre Dame does not win the Gator Bowl without that
No.
aspect of it.
Even with his mistakes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
There's no doubt about that. So, look, I'm being a little bit facetious because I understand fans are, this is my guy and I like this guy and I want him to win. But I want I want Sam Hartman to be the quarterback because I think that gives Notre Dame the highest upside in 2023.
right.
Now, a patient Tyler Buckner, which by all accounts, I think that's his very nature and who he is. I hope a patient Tyler Buckner sticks around and so
Yeah.
it can be the starting quarterback in 2024 and is prepared.
Or
Something happens to Sam Hartman this year.
right.
Now, do you want to package for Butler? Buckner. I think it's hard to do that with a quarterback as accomplished as Hartman. But if you wanted to do it in the red zone, you probably could. But look, I don't even want to. A quarterback with 13,000 yards and 110 touchdowns, who led Wake Forest to 41 points per game and 11 victories at Wake Forest.
Yeah.
I want to see how this. I want to see how high the ceiling. The ceiling is higher with Hartman in 2023 than Buckner. I mean, I can't see it any other way. Now, Tyler Buckner of 2024, who maybe gets some playing time for whatever reason
Sure.
this year, is even better next year. But I'm not cheering against Notre Dame's quarterbacks. I want the one that's the most accomplished. And right now, Sam Hartman is the most accomplished.
He's the most accomplished returning quarterback in college football
Yeah.
next year. I mean, you're talking about a kid that ranks 19th and 18th all time in college football history in passing yards and passing touchdowns. My thing, Tim, is I'm fine with people having the debate of, hey, because I think you can make a case, and it's not one that I agree with. I'm playing devil's advocate here, that if you're not someone who's as high on the playmakers around the quarterback, let's say you're someone who's down on the receivers. I'm not saying you are, I'm just making a point. You may say, hey, well, these guys are unproven. I don't know if they can do this. I lost some area to do that. I need a quarterback that can go out there and make plays on his own. That's a fair conversation to have. What bothers me is when you get into the whole, I'm going to tear down Tyler Buckner because I'm a Sam Hartman guy, or I'm going to tear down Sam Hartman because I'm a Tyler Buckner guy. I'm excited that they have both of them. But I think the other thing, too, is when you look at this conversation is I'm not surprised that Sam is not lighting the world on fire and completing 90% of his passes in practice because he's still learning the offense and he's still learning the wide receivers. I actually think he's done well because we're seeing them. He's already changing the offense. I mean, that's the thing that the takeaway that people need to understand is what we see at practice. And then also what I hear talking to my different sources is they throw the ball down the field a ton more
Yes. Yeah.
this year than they have in the past. And a big part of that is because you brought in Sam Hartman, who is one of the 4 or 5 best deep ball passers in college football the last 2 years statistically. And you've got players that fit his skill set. So I think the conversation is it has to be this, Tim, is you have to understand where are you from as a coach. It was this way in baseball, it's this way in football. you go through certain periods and you say, my expectation was not to be here by the end of April. My expectation is to be there by the time we get into game prep for Navy. And that's where they are with Sam Hartman. The expectation is not that Sam Hartman's going to look like he's in midseason form by practice 9. It's going to be, we got to get Sam Hartman ready when we take on Navy. That's the expectation that the Notre Dame coaching staff has. And I think that when the unfortunate aspect of it is, for Sam, looking at it from Sam's standpoint, is the fact that we have only seen the 2 practices where it was heavy blitz periods. Well, then you talk to sources and you hear about how well Sam moved the offense the day before when they were working on different things. It's part of the deal, and I think that's good for Sam Hartman to kind of get thrown into the fire a little bit like that. Hey, learn what the Notre Dame media is like now, because it's a different animal than it is at Wake Forest. And there's nothing, that's not an insult. That's just the reality. This is a different spotlight, and you need to be able to handle that. And I think he will. I think he's fine with that. But I also think it's encouraging to see that Tyler has developed as a passer. That's the biggest thing for me, Tim. And we were talking about this yesterday at practice. I said, the thing that's different about Tyler this year, I felt Tyler's always had very good anticipation. Tyler's always had a good mind for the game. I think he understands football. I think he's a smart kid. Tyler's problem was always mechanical, Tim. That was always the thing with him, and why he would be off base is he'd make a good read and then just miss because his footwork was always kind of scattered. It was just always too fast. He was a guy that struggled to consistently throw the ball with a consistent release point. He would just have those ones that just the ball would just come out of his hand funky, and as soon as it left his hand, you're like, this isn't going to be close. You just knew it was going to be incomplete. He's avoiding those type of throws this year, and I think a lot of it comes down to his feet. He looks a lot more calm with his feet going through things, and quarterback is a lot like, I've always felt, is a lot like, people compare it to being a pitcher in baseball. I've never felt that. I think being a quarterback is more like being a hitter or a shortstop in baseball, especially nowadays. And if your feet in baseball, that's why I played growing up, and that's why I say that. If your feet are hurried as a shortstop, you're going to be a really inaccurate thrower over to first base. You've got to have a rhythm, and I think Tyler looks much more in rhythm this year, and that's allowing his decision-making to shine more because the decisions that he's always, I thought, made good decisions, he's now more accurate with the throws. And it's definitely helped him in those blitz periods because he does have a very quick release. And I think that's benefited him a great deal. And I like the fact, too, that he's running around more in hopes of trying to find somebody to throw to, as opposed to just as soon as he starts moving, he tucks that sucker and looks for a place to run.
Yeah,
so we're seeing a lot of maturity in Tyler in that regard.
Yeah, I think so, too. And I like the fact that he's finding a comfort zone. I think he's benefited from whatever counseling or the relationship with Sam Hartman. It's good. I mean, it's a good balance. Frankly, when you talk about footwork, sometimes I question Hartman's a little bit. He has a high interception rate, and he tends to lean on that back foot a lot sometimes. And he's got kind of a little bit of a funky wind up in his throw a little bit, but he can. I mean, most quarterbacks you can nitpick a little bit, but no, it's a good balance. I mean, just getting back to the quarterback room, my God.
Yeah.
I mean, to have a Minchie, we've seen. I don't know what you saw Minchie throwing yesterday, but add him to the mix with Angeli, and Angeli is, in a tough situation, especially with CJ Carr being committed and coming in next year. But it's all good. It's Buckner needed to relax. I mean, think about when we saw him in August of last year, and then of course game situations early in the year. I don't know that he knew how to relax quite yet, how to get himself in the right frame of mind where he could just let it go and be confident in himself and let it fly. But no doubt, I mean, it's a much better situation. I'm happy as heck because while everybody was trying to convince me that he was throwing well in August of last year, I didn't see that. And we saw.
I think for me, Tim, the thing was more of just he whatever you may think of Tyler, he was still significantly better than Drew Pine. That's the thing for me that I always felt is he gives you a chance to win because he can make plays. Because Drew, here's my point, and here's where I'm optimistic about this season. The difference between this year and last year is last year they needed a quarterback that could make plays because there was uncertainty at running back. Although I like the running back, there was a lot of uncertainty at wide receiver, and they needed a quarterback that could say, "Hey, we're going to go out there and I'm going to put this team on my shoulders and do what Tyler did against South Carolina. They needed that every week. And they couldn't get that, and that's why they were a 9-4 team instead of a team that should have been better than 9-4, at the very least 10-2. And I think that's the big thing that brings me optimism now, and I think that's something that's helped Tyler as well, is as the players around him are ascending, and part of this was in the bowl game. And you watch the way Jaden Thomas played. I mean, played great that game. You watch, the way the running backs play, the way that the offensive line started opening up holes, something they did not do in the first two games when Tyler was the starter. You say now whoever the quarterback is, and the same thing with Sam Hartman, is Sam's got to learn, like, dude, this is not Wake Forest. You do not have a defense giving up 28, 29 points a game. You have a run game. And I think that's where Sam is still kind of learning as a player. Is number one, there is a footwork transition that he is making, going away from that mesh and the way that they did things at Wake. And there's also the understanding of you don't have to put the team on your shoulders. And you're not going to have games at Notre Dame where you're going to score 50 points a game and lose like he has the last 3 years against North Carolina. And I think that's something that Sam has to learn. And I think and we're now seeing Tyler reaping the benefits of that realization that he came to late last season of, hey, when he took over for the bowl game was a completely different looking team than the one he had against against Ohio State on offense.
Yeah.
Offensive line was much better. Receiving core had emerged. It was just a better situation. And I think that's something to me that is going to help this quarterback room, because they don't need a guy to go out there and put the team on his shoulders and win them a bunch of football games. They need a guy that's going to run the offense and get the ball where it needs to go to. And then occasionally in clutch situations, you're going to have to step up and make a play. And we saw that from Tyler in the bowl game last year. And we've seen that a lot from Sam throughout his career as well.
Well, I mean, Buckner got hurt, so there wasn't an option per se to turn to. What I did like about Pine was I thought that he brought now I'm going to say this and then I'm going to offer a clarifier after it. He brought some emotional stability to the position after what he went through it against Cal, because that was not emotional stability against the Bears. But and the North Carolina, and I think that there's a tendency to forget the North Carolina and BYU games. I mean, I thought Drew Pine played really, really well in those games. So he gave him some stability, but I completely agree with you that we always understood that the upside was greater with Tyler Buckner, but he was injured. And so you didn't have much of a choice there. But now the emotional stability of Buckner is what I'm reading in the body language. As a former baseball coach, to me, body language was huge, not only to convince me that you were ready to play, but to convince your teammates that you were ready to play and to convince your opponent that you were ready to play. So I was always very big on body language, and I wasn't a big fan of Buckner's because he wasn't comfortable. And that happens when you haven't had playing experience and you wake up one day and you're the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. It's not an easy thing to do, but I am, of course, always felt like Buckner's upside was much greater. And now we're getting an opportunity to see that, or we haven't. I'm not sitting here and saying that, okay, Tyler Buckner's arrived. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we've seen progress in his game. And by him making progress, that allows him to take the next step in his progress.
What it is, Tim, is we're seeing him build on how the season ended, right? Because there's somebody in the chat now like, I'm not sold on Tyler Buckner because he threw however many. I'm like, look, pick any quarterback in the country and you're going to find games where they turn the ball over a bunch. It's just, it's
like our opinion is not based upon the two practices we've seen. It's based on the Gator Bowl.
The baseline's different now that we're evaluating Tyler. And that's the thing is, like, we now have, okay, we have seen good Tyler Buckner for 95% of the snaps that he played in against South Carolina. There were some big mistakes. The two of the three interceptions were big mistakes, in my opinion. There's a couple other plays where he had guys open and just, sped up his footwork. And I mean, there's one particular play, I think it was a wheel route to Chris Tyree, I think, and he just short arms and just throws it at his ankles. And you're like, man, if he could have that throwback, But we also saw him throw a pick six that allowed South. You're on the verge of putting that game away, and he throws a pick six. And I remember looking at the sideline and then looked him from the stands and then looking up at the TV and seeing Marcus Freeman and Tyler Buchner engaging, and Marcus Freeman's talking to him calmly, Tyler's and taking it calmly, and there was no, irate, get in his face, scream at him. Tyler's not throwing his arms around. You just saw this level of calm, and you're like, let's see what happens next, because then you're like, we're about to learn something about this head football coach, or we're about to learn something about this quarterback. And they just kind of go out there that next series and just calmly go right down the field. They ran the ball really well, but then he makes two huge third down throws, one for the touchdown, the other one that we don't talk about as much as that throw to Chris Tyree, getting that ball out to Chris Tyree for the first down. And you say, okay, we have seen sort of an emergence from Tyler Buchner. And I don't know if that guy was there early in the season.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there early in the season.
No, he wasn't.
And now he's building on that. And that's the thing, is we now have a baseline to build off. Whereas last year, we knew Tyler could make plays with his legs. We knew he could make plays off script. What we didn't know is, could he run the offense snap after snap after snap and do the little things? Tyler Buchner's always been a playmaker, but can he be a quarterback? And I think that's what we saw in the bowl game, and that's what we're seeing now in the spring. And it has to give you confidence that if he is the guy for whatever reason. I mean, what if Sam comes out and has a phenomenal fall camp and sprains his ankle or breaks his ankle, or something bad happens, and all of a sudden now Tyler's a starter no matter what? It's good that Tyler's building on this. Here's, in regards specific to the quarterback competition, however, here's the reason I think Sam Hartman still starts. And it has nothing to do with the experience, because you've laid that out already, Tim. Like, we all dream of, can you imagine what Sam Hartman could do with the supporting cast that he's going to have at Notre Dame? And not at receiver, because Wake had pretty darn good receivers, but it's everywhere else. It's running back, offensive line, defense, all of that. But it's more so that Tyler's been in the system now for years. This is still basically the same system that they've always run. The terminology is the same. There's some wrinkles here and there, but he knows these receivers. If Tyler's going to start, I feel like he had to come out of spring well ahead of Sam Hartman. If it's even close right now, that bodes well for Hartman, because Sam's only going to get more and more comfortable. The point being, there's more room for Sam to kind of quickly ascend within this offense than there is necessarily for Tyler from where they are right now. And that's kind of my point is if Tyler was going to be the guy, it had to be very obvious, because you are going to take into account the experience, the proven track record nature of it. And as much as I love what Tyler's done, I just don't know if he's that far ahead to where you can say, oh yes, I'm confident he's going to win the job. But we'll see. And that's part of the fun of it.
I don't know how does the coaching staff, like, all things being equal, where they're both competing for the job, how do you give the job to Buchner? I mean,
well, to me,
it's not realistic, is it? I don't.
Only if Tyler, and this is my thing, Tyler has to be significantly better just on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that's the only way you can make it happen. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think this, though. I think this is going to be good for Sam Hartman, because I'm a believer in this, Tim, and I've said this in the past. I'm going to say it, and I want you to speak on it. I think it's very important that we are seeing what we're seeing right now, and that Tyler is being given this legitimate opportunity. It's not just talking.
He is. They're giving him a ton of looks with the first team. I think that I commend Marcus Freeman and Guidugli and Jared Parker for doing it. They are giving him every opportunity to excel. Now, whether they'll give him every opportunity to actually have the job is a different story. But I think they are setting up the situation really, really well this spring.
For me, why I think this is important is, number one, it lets Tyler know we still believe in you, which helps your chances of keeping him around. Number two, it can be very difficult to bring in a transfer at a premium position and have him be the leader of your football team. If the team looks at him and says, this guy walked in and you just handed him something. He didn't have to earn anything. I don't care what he did at Wake Forest. This is Notre Dame. That's how it can be, potentially could be perceived in the locker room for a guy that from everything I've ever heard is the players do like and respect Tyler. He's a lot different than Drew personality-wise, but there's respect there. Sam needed to, if Sam's going to start, he needs to the perception has to be that he earned that, because that's how you're going to go to battle with this guy. That's how on 3rd and 5, when you're down 4 against Ohio State or on the road against Clemson, that the players are going to look at number 10 in the huddle and say, he's got this. Let me just go do my job, because number 10 is going to do what he needs to do, because you've seen him go out and earn it. And if something happens where Sam isn't the guy, and for me, it's going to be because of some sort of injury, then you're also going to have faith in number 12, because you watch number 12 battle every single day against this guy that came in and everybody just assumed was going to get the job. And so to me, it uplifts the team's view of the quarterback, that I don't care who they put in, we can win with you. And I think it's even more important for Sam that he be viewed as someone who went out there and competed and didn't complain, didn't act entitled, just went in there, was a good teammate and battled and then won the job. I think that's going to be good for the team chemistry, because if guys are just let's be honest, Tim. Well, I shouldn't say let's be honest, because you may have a different opinion on this, but I think that's one of the many things that did in the 2016 team, is talking to different people around the program. There was a perception that didn't matter what Malik did in practice, DeShone Kizer was going to be the guy. And in my opinion, I thought Malik outplayed DeShone almost every practice we went to that fall camp, and it just didn't matter. DeShone was going to be the guy. At least that was the perception amongst the team, and that led to what I felt was a very fractured locker room. You have to have the perception that there's a legitimate competition, and whoever wins it won it. I just think Sam's ultimately going to win it. I don't even think it's about how can the coaching staff not do that. I just think by the time Sam gets 40 practices under his belt, he's going to look a lot different than he is in practice 9. That's something to keep in mind, folks. Is what was yesterday? 10, 9 or 10? I think practice. What was yesterday? Practice 9 or 10?
It was number 9. They're going to squeeze in 6 here real quick.
9 of 40. Right? Think about where that's content. Sam's in practice 9 of 40 getting ready for the first game. So he's going to be fine. Moral story is they're going to be good at quarterback. And you know what else is good, Tim? Go ahead. Sorry. Yes, please respond to that.
I don't, I can't vouch for exactly what Hartman's demeanor is within the team. All we can judge it on is what we see. And I think that I think he's doing a good job of blending in with his teammates. I mean, I know, having talked to Buckner, I guess you can be disingenuous about this, but I think Buckner appreciates the way that Hartman has approached this. I think Jared Parker and Gino Guidugli have done a really, really nice job of striking a balance of what you say, at least creating the appearance. That's not even fair. I think they've made it an equal competition on the practice field, certainly based upon the opportunities that we've seen Buckner run the number 1 offense. So, yeah, I think they've handled it very well. It's another reason why I'm optimistic about Jared Parker. I don't know that much about him. I know that his situation at West Virginia was a little bit beyond his control, maybe sometimes a lot beyond his control. And, I know there are people that felt like he was maybe not treated with great fairness with the title of offensive coordinator. But I'm optimistic. I'd certainly like the personality that he is. Like, you think about his first press conference, I think he endeared himself to Notre Dame fans just by him being himself and saying the right things and talking the right game. And there are words and then there are actions, but I think a coach's words can lead to good actions on the practice field, and I think that's what's happened. So it's a good situation. Ultimately, the more proven player, as you say, over 40 practices will likely emerge. And you want competition at the quarterback position, and it's
healthy.
I think I agree with you. I think it is a healthy situation.
Here's what's also healthy, Tim. The talent around the quarterback is going to be pretty good. And a lot of the question marks, in my opinion, that we're talking about here in April are normal and what a lot of teams are going through. You know who else is sitting there trying to figure out how good their offensive line is going to be? Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, right? I mean, but there's a level of confidence, in my opinion, that they're going to figure that out for 2 reasons. Number one is we know who Andrew Kristofic is, and at the very least, he's a steady presence. I mean, him and Joe Walt stepping into the starting lineup is one of the things that solidified what up to that point in time had been a very poor offensive line in 2021. We know what he can do. We know the baseline. So if somebody beats him out, you feel good that you're going to have something there. And Billy Schrouth is a work in progress, but he's a very talented work in progress. And if Joe Rudolph is who we think he is and hope he is, then they're going to be fine there. I'm not concerned about that. And regarding the running back is going to be fine. They're going to be loaded there. I think they have one of the best backfields in football. Receivers, one I want to talk to you about, Tim, because I'll let you kind of kick it off and just kind of share your opinion, and I'll tell you maybe why I'm a little bit more bullish on this group of where they are right now. But just kind of overall, because you have said two things. Number one is the receivers maybe they're not where they need to be, essentially is what you said, which is completely agree. But the other thing you said is even within that, they're so much further along than where they were a year ago at this time because of injuries and a lot of other things.
We would have had to lie in order to say something real positive about the wide receiver core last year. I mean, we didn't think Deion Colzie was. I last year at this time I didn't, based upon again the intel that we get. I didn't think Deion Colzie was going to be a player, and he has a long way to go. I mean, he still has a lot to prove. There's no doubt about that. But Merriweather, we know, is a big time player. Jaden Thomas made huge strides last year, both in his physical approach. He's changed his body a little bit, but mentally, I think he's come to grips with who he is and what his assets are, and he's putting those to good use. I don't know what ends up happening with Styles, but at least in the early practices that we had an opportunity to see this spring, I thought he was playing with a real spring in his step and aggression, which, man, by the time as that season evolved last year, there was no confidence in that body language whatsoever. It's what I think the upside for Tobias Merriweather is really, really high, and he's just scratching the surface of that. But I think we're going to see him get beyond the surface this year. And again, getting back to a guy like Hartman, once he gets on the same page with these guys, is going to make the receiving core that much better. I mean, that's what good quarterbacks do. They make receivers better receivers, and I think he has an opportunity to do that. But as a whole, you love I don't know how the freshman class. I don't know how you could expect them to be more impressive at receiver at this stage, since they're second semester high school seniors. Flores has impressed all of us. Just the way he's put together, my goodness. I mean, that's an impressive player. Jaden Greathouse has flashed. Certainly Braylon James has flashed. Now, I know the Notre Dame coaching staff felt like James, in terms of his evolution and development, walked in this spring as the third among those three in development. But when we've seen him make plays, and he's hard to defend, man. He gets open. He gets beyond the deepest of the deep.
Tim, if you don't beat him off the line, you're done.
Yeah.
I mean, and now that's what happened yesterday is they were beating him up at the line of scrimmage, and he had a red jersey on yesterday. He had my understanding is he had a blow to the head, so he's just being careful with him. But they were letting him in one-on-ones and in different periods. And what hurt him yesterday was because, as you said, Braylon is the most raw of that group. But he's also the most explosive receiver they have on the roster, not named Chris Tyree, and he's about 5 inches taller than Chris Tyree. And so if you don't beat him at the snap, you're done. You don't have a chance. And that's the thing that we've seen and we've heard all spring is if he gets a step on you, it's strike up the band, right? I mean, it's going to be over. And the thing I like about this unit too, I mean, we haven't even talked about Chris Tyree yet, who I don't view as a guy that he's not going to look like Theo Riddick in 2010. I don't think he has the same it's not the same offense. I don't know if his skill set's necessarily the same, but he's going to do some things this year where his speed is going to add something to the mix. I mean, you're having to go on one snap dealing with Jaden Thomas in the slot, and then the very next snap you can end up be dealing with Chris Tyree in the slot, or maybe next series. I love the diversity that this group brings to the table from a skill set standpoint, Tim, and I think that's something that as an offensive coordinator I want. And when I was a receivers coach, I tried to recruit is if I got a bunch of the same guy. When we play a team that happens to be able to match up with that, we have no answers. Whereas right now, from series to series, I could go one series, and I could have Tobias Merriweather, Jalen Thomas, and Deion Colsey on the field and have just a bunch of giants. And the very next series, I could come out with Rico Flores, Chris Tyree, and Lorenzo Styles and look completely different in what we're going to throw at you. And that's difficult for a team. I'm not saying they're going to do that. I'm making a point in style of play. And I think that could make Notre Dame a lot harder to deal with. And it gives Jared Parker a lot of different type of toys to play with that Tommy Rees just didn't have last year because of all the injuries to Avery Davis. I mean, taking Avery Davis off of that lineup last year took away a player that they didn't have anybody else on the roster could do what he could do.
No.
And so, that was very limiting from an offensive coordinator standpoint. Well, you are so much in better position to sustain an injury this year than you were a year ago, to the point where Caleb Smith comes in from Virginia Tech, third in the ACC in yards per catch, honorable mention All-ACC player, and he's struggling to get on the field. And I don't know what his future plans hold. We'll have more to say about that after the spring. But you're watching this kid come in, Tim, and I'm like, who's number 80? Like, he's just not standing out. A kid that we've seen do it on Saturdays, but when he's in this room, you'll watch him against Deion Colsey, and Deion needs a lot of work. You're no doubt correct about that. We saw that yesterday. He drops a post route for a touchdown yesterday. Right. But what he also did was run past Benjamin Morrison by like 5 yards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can fix the drop ball part because I could look at it as a receivers coach and say, I'm watching, and he's like, he took his eye off of it. He just assumed he was going to catch it. He's got to focus on bringing it into the catch point. That stuff I can teach. What I can't teach is 6'5", 215 who just smoked an All-American cornerback.
Yeah, no
That's
doubt
what I can't teach.
Yeah, no doubt. I got it. I don't know what to expect out of Chris Tyree. Quite frankly, right now, I'm not real optimistic about it because he's not a natural receiver. They have to find a way to get the ball in his hands where it doesn't look like he's got boxing gloves on. And so in the past, that's been swinging out of the backfield, and that looked very natural. It's the running of routes that does not look natural to me at all.
Right.
And it's my understanding that he struggled a little bit again yesterday. So I'm not sure.
At times, I think there's some things he does well and some things he's still learning. Yeah. The speed stuff he does well, crossers, drags, things like that. He's doing those fine. It's the intricate parts. But the thing that people have to understand about Chris as a receivers coach, I've had to deal with. Recruit. It is the Division III level, Tim. I don't just go out there and pick the best of the best receivers. I got to go find some athletic quarterback who's never played receiver before and turn him into a quarterback.
Then you have to make him a wide receiver,
right? And so it's the process is when a kid is still learning how to run routes, he's not going to be a great natural pass catcher unless he's been doing it his whole life. It's once you get the route running part more comfortable, that's when the pass catching becomes more natural.
Yeah,
and that's where Chris is right now.
He's not confident in his route running.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So because he's thinking right now, and because he's not comfortable with that, you're not going to see him look natural. There are some things he's done well that I think he shows there's some potential there. My point is he's a lot in the similar situation to Sam Hartman in that he's practiced 9 of 40. The point is, however, is right now, what I like about what Notre Dame is doing is they're putting Chris Tyree in a lot of practice situations that you're not sure if that's necessarily where you want him to be in the fall. And now's the time to do that. Let's see if he can work the seams or not. Let's see. And that's what I'm saying. Like Theo Riddick had a natural knack, and I don't know where it came from because he was a running back in high school. But the minute they moved Theo to receiver, Tim, you saw a natural feel for working certain parts of the field that you don't see from Chris. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think he's going to be the same kind of guy. But what we do know is that if you get Chris Tyree the ball on a bubble, a now screen, or a crossing route, or a wheel routes that we have seen him catch the football, you give him a little crease and it's going to be a home run. And that's why you're making this move. And if the other stuff develops, great. But right now it's just about let's figure out what he can do. And then once you get to the fall, you say, okay, right now, here's what I feel comfortable with Chris Tyree doing, and here's what I don't feel comfortable with Chris Tyree doing. And so we're going to put him in position to do this because you have to find a way to get this kid to football. And as we saw last year in games, Tim, for whatever reason, you can say they shouldn't be that way, but South Carolina was this way, Clemson was this way, North Carolina was this way, Cal was this way. When Notre Dame starts using Chris Tyree, especially when they start moving him, teams overreact to it. And I you could say why, but Chris Tyree had very little production against South Carolina last year individually, but Chris Tyree directly is the reason for about 50
Yeah.
rushing yards from Tyler Buckner and a 40-something yard touchdown from Braden Lindsey because of the way the defense reacted when Chris Tyree's in the game. If you can find ways to get him a couple big plays early, now every time he's in the game, I'm going to use him to get the ball, but also now I have a weapon to say I can influence you to react this way because with Chris Tyree, because you have to prepare for that speed. But what I'm really setting you up for is I'm about to bang a post over your head. And that's why you have to force the issue with Chris at this point in time, in my opinion, and really stretch what he can and can't do. And then once you get to like middle of August, you start to say, okay, we now have a baseline of what he can and can't do.
Yeah, you'll know what routes he can run and what he's comfortable with at that point. You have to get him the ball in space. I thought it was a little frustrating at times when they would get him the ball in the flat, and if he doesn't make that initial acceleration, he's getting tripped up a lot. So it's a huge work in progress. But as you say, Brian, I mean, he's a great enough athlete that he commands respect when he's on the field. There's no doubt about that, and that's good for him, and it's good for the people, the skill position people around him.
I think with Deion Colzie, to me, it's still about, do you want to be great or not? That's still the thing, because and here's what gives me optimism about Deion. I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to come to find out that Deion is one of those guys that's a Saturday player. And as a coach, they can drive you nuts. And I had a kid like that at Duquesne, kid named Michael Warfield, Tim, and he had a weird body because he just could not get loose. I mean, he'd be over there half the practice, somebody stretching him out. He was a good player in practice, but when we get to Saturdays and the adrenaline's flowing, he's looser, and he was just a stud. I had my best receiver at another school was like that. We've seen this. You've been doing this a long time, Tim. You've seen guys like that in Notre Dame.
Yeah, nobody really wants to coach guys like that.
No, you don't. And the only way you can get away with it is when you're 6'5", 215 and run a 4.5.
I had a kid that was the laziest kid in practice, but you could wake him up at 3:00 in the morning, put a bat in his hand, stick him in the batter's box, and he hit a line drive. I mean, he just, when it came to game time, he was ready to play. Yeah. It's frustrating because you're trying to set an example with everybody. I'm not saying that this kid didn't work hard. I am specifically referring to a kid like that. But I mean, you want him to be good all the time, and sometimes there are game day players. Right. Not a lot.
I think the reason I say that is because what we did see from Deion last year in his limited catches is he was asked to step up in big moments, and he did. Yep. I mean, third down in the Navy game, and what was it, the BC game? He had two, and then against USC, he was great against USC. I mean, made some clutch catches, and if Drew Pine had more confidence in his ability to throw the ball beyond 15, 20 yards, and by that point in time in the season, I think Drew's confidence throwing the ball downfield was in anything other than a one-on-one was just shot. But he's got Deion open on a potential deep shot late in the game on that. It was on that play he ended up throwing the interception. He's got a cover two hole throw right there to Deion that could have been a big play. And that's what makes me think like maybe this kid is just a game day guy. Yeah. But I do think what I've seen from Deion is he has improved this spring compared to last year. It's just one of those things where he's got to still establish a level of consistency of focus. And I think if that moment comes, you're talking about a potential dynamic 1-2 punch on the outside. But right now, that potential 1-2 punch on the outside has a combined 14 career catches, right? And Deion's got 13 of those 14 career catches. You know what I mean?
Again, talking body language with Colzie, I liked it really a lot in the first two open practices, which was 5 periods and pretty much a body count for us journalists. But again, I don't want to read too much into that because a lot of times that's kind of created in our own minds. But when Colzie and Merriweather line up now, there just has to be a greater deal of respect from the opposition. I mean, you certainly would like to see a degree of consistency on the
Mhm.
practice field with Colsey, because then I mean, it going into a game, it makes it that much easier for the offensive coordinator to press that button.
And that's where my optimism comes from Dion. I think he's gonna be okay. But again, it's projecting because you're not necessarily because we've also seen guys, Tim, in our coaching careers, because sports are different, but sports are the same. That guy that on Tuesday and Wednesday is great. Saturday comes and it's now full padded tackle, and the lights are bright, and the crowd, the stands are full, and he's not that guy anymore.
Yeah.
And that's
I've coached less of those
yeah.
than the ones that are not great in practice
Yeah.
and excel on game.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. So I like where they are, Tim. Here's why that's why I'm optimistic about the receivers. I love the tools. You've got a lot to work with. We're not hoping that this kid who's just okay steps up and plays beyond his talent level like we have in recent seasons. And I also think the tight end position, we haven't seen as much from that. I think that's intentional. I think the lack of depth at tight end this spring, we've seen very little 12 personnel. That's going to come back in the fall when this depth
Yeah,
chart fills up.
no doubt.
And so we'll see a lot more versatility there. We're going to see more 21 and 20 personnel in the fall when the running back depth chart gets back to full health. Because this is the thing that gets me fired up, Tim. I feel good about where the offense is going right now. Defense is always ahead of the offense, should be always ahead of the offense in spring and in the first 10 days of fall camp. That's just to me, in my experience, when I've played on the best teams I've played on, that's usually been the makeup of those teams. And I feel that's where it's been at Notre Dame. You don't necessarily want to be in a situation like we were in 2017 where you're like, I don't know if this defensive line can stop anybody because they're just getting run on every day. It's a 60-yard touchdown. Well, then you come to find out that offensive line was pretty freaking good. But that's a bit of an anomaly type of season. Although Mike Elko did warn us that year. He was like, guys, like, we're better than you think. That whole line is ridiculous.
Hey, thank goodness for the arrival of Mike Elko, because
I know.
it sparked a run of quality
Yeah,
defense.
it did. Uh, when I look at it, Tim, I think when I think of this group, I think they're ascending. But I think the thing that not I think, but the thing that I believe, the thing that gives me optimism is they're trending in the right direction. But it's a depth of talent that you have to choose from, because you're not. If Dion doesn't step up, you're screwed. If so and so doesn't step up, you're screwed. And this whole spring, we've seen almost nothing from Logan Diggs. We know what Logan Diggs can do. We have not seen a single snap from Jadarian Price. Jeremiah Love doesn't show up until June, and you could make a case that he's going to be your most physically gifted running back the minute he steps foot on campus. And if he isn't, it's probably Jadarian Price. And then you talk about receiver. We're going to get the other Caleb Smith's going to show up this summer. These guys are going to continue to evolve. The foundation that the freshmen are laying now, and I thought you made a great point, Tim, is I don't know if we could ask them to be much better than they've been up to this point in
Right.
time.
Right.
And they're only going to get better. Again, they are on practice 9 of 40 getting ready for the season. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. We've seen no Eli Raridan. Cooper Flanagan's going to show up. And I've said to people before, I will not be shocked if at some point in time next year season, they're saying, hey, when we go 12 personnel, we got to put this kid on the field because he's the best blocker we have.
Yeah.
At tight end. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic for me, because there's a lot of talent still out there ready to be added to this arsenal of weapons that this football team has on offense.
I'm jumping ahead of you here, Brian, but where I'm concerned depth wise is you don't want to see them lose one of the starting 5 on the offensive line.
Yeah.
I don't,
especially a tackle. Especially a tackle.
Well, yeah, you don't want to certainly.
Yeah. Well, not even just because how good those guys are, Tim, but I just don't have a lot of faith right now in what's behind.
I'll tell you what,
tackle.
I'm a little. I said this on our podcast today. I've seen the best version of Tosh Baker that I've seen since he got there. Not that he can replace Joe Alt, because Joe Alt is a first round draft choice, probably a year from now, if he so chooses, which he's probably going to be in a position to do. But I don't know. Like we were talking about Andrew Kostovic. Yeah, he had 7 starts 2 years ago, and he's, at the very least, he's a solid offensive guard. But if you lose him,
right,
it's
a big question mark.
Michael Carmody hasn't been able to stay healthy. I guess Pat Coogan was getting some guard reps
Yeah, and
yesterday. Is that accurate?
he is a Kane Madden type, and I mean this in the best way possible. He's a guy that you don't want to play outside of his zone right here. Like this is the concern I have at guard is Rocco is a big physical kid. Pat Coogan is a big physical kid that if you can play in a phone booth, they're going to hold it. They're going to be okay. But if they have to step and play with any kind of athleticism, it's a problem. You could potentially move Tai Chan inside potentially. But the other thing too is that's another position where I say there's a kid coming in this summer that if these guards don't step up and prove themselves, or these number 2 tackles don't step up and prove themselves, there's a 6'6", 325-pound kid named Charles Jagasaw that's going to be showing up this summer too. That you could say, hey, look, this kid's going to make mistakes, but I'm going to err on the side of the 6'6", 325-pound kid with great feet.
Yeah.
But you don't want to have to be there though. You don't want to have to play him because this is a philosophy I've always had on freshmen, Tim. I've always said I love playing freshmen, but I want to play freshmen because I want to, because they've earned it, not because I have to.
Sure.
Robert Hainsey played in 2017 because he earned it, not because they didn't have faith in Tommy Kramer.
Right.
That's where you want to be.
Blake Fisher earned it as well to start the season last year. And I don't know. I mean, should the previous offensive line coach should he have recognized that Joe Alt was ready to go right away in 2021? That might be a little bit unfair because it's a true freshman, but
sure.
I also am very excited to see the freshman offensive lineman, not because necessarily they might step into the starting lineup, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Joe Otting on the interior. And I'm not sure. I'm sure you have an opinion. I'm not exactly sure where Absher ends up.
I think he's a guard, and I think he's going to need time.
I mean, I tend to think that. I
pass blocked 15 times his entire career, Tim. I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but I mean that's. I mean, we saw it at the Army game. Now, by the end of the week, he was doing better, but this is a kid that's going to need a lot of work. Love the tools, but he's going to need a lot of work.
Yeah.
Joe Wadding's going to need work on the opposite side. Sullivan Absher's going to show up with size enough to play. Joe Wadding's not, but Joe Wadding's in the athleticism, the toughness, the technique.
Pendleton,
Sam Pendleton's.
I don't know if you've seen anything with Pendleton yet.
Still learning, but big. He's a lot more. I was talking about this yesterday. He's a lot more athletic than I thought he was going to be.
Yeah,
like just even watching him go through drills, he moves better than I thought he was going to move. To be honest with you, and we started to see it a little bit as a senior. He was one of my risers as a senior. Tim, Sam took a big jump as a senior. I thought he moved better. But I like the way he moves. He's in practice 9 of 40. He's going to need time. And that's a position that I think freshmen can have a hard time playing because it's such a physical position relative to corner or receiver. But the unique thing about this class that's coming in is it is outside of Joe Otting, who, by the way, I love Joe Otting, by the way, but he is undersized, just like I love Ashton Craig, but he was going to need a couple years in the weight room to get really physically ready to play. There's a lot of kids that physically step in the door and are at least physically ready to compete. And Sam Pendleton and Jagasaw are at the top of that list for me because they're so strong. And Sam's a very strong kid. But again, with anything, Tim, if you're not sure what you're doing, you're not going to move with the same speed and confidence that you are if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so that's why those kids, that it'll come in time. But
I was blown away with just interviewing Pendleton, the maturity of that kid. Huh? I mean, I did not expect that. I mean, he looked like a farm boy coming into Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I don't know whether
far from it.
Able to, I'm not putting down.
No.
Sons of farmers,
but look at the pictures we saw of him on his recruiting visit. He's just a big goofy kid, him and Sullivan taking those funky pictures.
That's not who that kid is, man. No. He is a very, very bright, very intelligent kid.
Yeah,
I was impressed with him there. So they certainly need those bodies.
Yeah.
They need those freshman bodies to create a better competition because right now, and I know they like Ashton Craig and Coogan was a guy that I think showed some things to them last year. Tough luck for Carmody because he had an opportunity at least to start the spring, as you have to beat me out. And Billy Schrouth isn't giving up that starting spot.
No. Well, and the thing about Michael Carmody is he's one of those guys, Tim, that always had the athleticism and toughness, but the question was always, can he carry the weight and stay healthy?
Yeah, well,
Anyone
obviously,
can weigh 300 pounds, but
yeah,
can you be healthy at 300 pounds? And with Michael, we've just learned that he can. And then so he gets down to 280 and he just and now he's not big enough to hold up to the
yeah,
pounding of the position. And it's unfortunate because I thought he had potential. And he's an athletic kid. He's more of a guard than a tackle anyway. He was out of position in
sure,
2021 playing
yeah.
left tackle. That wasn't fair to him. But he's a big, strong kid. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And as you mentioned, you give Billy Schrouth almost an entire spring of him taking reps and you not taking any,
It's over, yeah,
it's over. You have no chance.
because it was always like you're going to go through some growing pains with a redshirt freshman, but damn, look at that redshirt freshman. I mean, he's not. He's going to be good, and
Right.
he's going to be a lot better by the end of this season.
Sure.
So
Well,
then
and
it's like,
fortunately this year, Tim, the schedule sets up a lot easier for young kids stepping on the field than it did a year ago, where you're
yeah,
being thrust
it
into
would be
Ohio State and
slightly
Marshall.
better
Yeah.
if Central Michigan and NC State were flip flop. It'd be
Yeah.
really really good.
You know what? I'm going to tell you, Tim, I'm going to disagree with that from this standpoint because I feel like you've got 2 games to warm up for NC State.
I no, I get what you're saying.
And
Yeah,
then you've got that come down game from NC State to then work through some kinks for
yeah, that's a
Ohio
good
State.
point. That's a good point.
So, now maybe if you were to say flip Duke and Ohio State
Yeah,
and then flip
yeah.
Central
I
Florida
do.
or
I
Central
just gotta
Michigan
throw this
and NC
out.
State.
Like Notre Dame's been dominating the ACC,
Mhm.
but they're getting the best. I mean,
Yeah,
almost all of the best of the ACC this year with NC
outside of
State.
Florida State.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. And Florida State obviously is becoming for real, but Duke coming what they did. Maybe I'm sure Wake Forest takes a little bit of a step back, but Pittsburgh, is going to be physical. Of course, Clemson. So
Louisville get with Jeff
Notre Dame's
Brom.
been dominating the
Yeah,
ACC, but they're getting most of the best of the ACC this year.
yeah, and it's gonna be a good test for them, I believe. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball, Tim, because you and I are the same way. My biggest question mark going into the spring was the defensive line. I have more questions at linebacker. You and I are somewhat on the same page at linebacker and somewhat disagree. The argument I made last year is for people that are clamoring for somebody else to play linebacker. At one of those positions, I agree with. I still don't understand the JD Bertrand disrespect. I'll flat out call it disrespect, and we've talked about that on this show. Jack Kaiser to me is an interesting player. The issues that I had with Jack Kaiser are not Jack Kaiser. It was the Notre Dame coaches, and this is the thing for me with linebackers. It's not just the problems on the D line. It was the way that they were used and what they were being asked to do in year one. In my opinion, there was too much on their plate. We've seen this before. I thought there was too much on their plate. They play with uncertainty at times. Like I remember the long run against Cal where Jack Kaiser just doesn't get over the top and scrape. I know Jack Kaiser can make that play. I've seen Jack Kaiser make that play, but he was uncertain of what he was supposed to do. And then next thing you know, he gets sealed inside. My whole thing is a couple things. Number one, in year 2, I expect there to be improvement because they're going to have, even if Al Golden doesn't change a thing, they're going to be better because they're going to have a much better sense of the offense, of the defense this year. They're just going to know it better. And my hope is that they start to utilize the talent more effectively. And the point I've made is if you can stop putting Jack Kaiser in space and ask him to cover down the field against athletic guys with his lack of length and let him attack the football, when Jack Kaiser's used to attack the football, he's been pretty darn good the last 2 years. What we're seeing this spring is almost exclusively Jack Kaiser being used to attack the football, and he's been pretty good. JD's JD. The question for me still remains the will position, but I'm a lot more confident of Mike and Rover than I was a year ago. And I also more confident because of you've seen Nolan Ziegler have a great spring. He's your biggest linebacker on your roster. And oh, by the way, he's also your fastest linebacker right now. Him and Jalen Steed are the 2 fastest linebackers from a speed standpoint. Jalen Steed's now going into year 2. He's still going to make mistakes, but he's going into year 2. And then you've got a couple freshmen that have really impressed me so far this spring. So there's a lot better numbers that we're seeing there. The talent has always been better than I think it's been given credit for compared to last season. So it's given me a lot more confidence in what that unit's going to do. And now it comes down to, but is the D-line going to be better? And I think that's the thing that I've seen before too. And I've noticed 2 things about the D-line. Number one is Riley Mills finally looks comfortable playing inside. And number 2, this is a much bigger defensive line. than we saw last year, where last year there were two guys in the rotation above 290, and that was Gabriel Rubio, and because Aiden Countana got hurt in March, so he wasn't in it. It's Gabriel Rubio and Chris Smith. Chris Smith was such an important pickup for this team last year. If you don't have him, it could have really got ugly trying to stop the run. Now, Tim, there's only, I think, one guy. Let me think here. Two guys that period going through the spring at defensive tackle that are under 290 pounds. It's Donovan Hinish and Howard Cross. We know what Howard Cross can do. And so I think those things have really impressed me, Tim. And yesterday, Riley Mills was an absolute dude yesterday. But he's been good to me all spring because he was always a guy that had a D-tackle body but a big end game to me. Now I think he's finally gotten comfortable being a defensive tackle. And I think we're starting to see that benefit this defensive line quite a bit.
We were asked, one of the questions that was asked of us is, like who has a chance to beat out some of the older players? Like can Tyson Ford beat out Riley Mills? Well, you just invested 2 years of Riley Mills. I mean, I was disappointed many times with Mills because I didn't think after his initial surge, I didn't think that he would fight to get off blocks. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, I still think that that's a work in progress, but there's no doubt that he's made significant strides. Howard Cross, you wish he was bigger, but God bless him. I mean, he's a good football player. Gabriel Rubio's size, his length is extremely important. I think him and Mills as a tandem at three technique is really, really interesting and something that they can build upon. I don't know what you've seen of Jason Onye. I've been very impressed with Onye. Do you feel the same way about that? I mean, that is a guy with length and maneuverability.
And he's twitchy.
He absolutely is. He's twitchy like Cross is twitchy off the snap, but he's longer. And so you have more,
about 30 pounds bigger.
Right. And so you have more to deal with as an interior offensive lineman. I really been impressed with Jason Onye. And it's like, well, why hasn't Tyson Ford developed? Well, he was a defensive end coming out of high school, and he's had to add 30 pounds and learn a new position, a defensive tackle. I'm really impressed with Onye. I've also had people say to us, well, why don't they put Rubio at nose and Cross at three technique? Because you want that length at three technique. You want that 6'5" plus guy at three technique, not a 6 foot guy at three technique, even though that may be Cross's best position.
The debate for me should be about, should Rubio and Onye switch, not Cross and Rubio. I'm with you on that. Like, to me, I still think Rubio would be better at nose than three technique because I don't think he's enough of a playmaker as a three technique. Having said that, the other thing too is when you break down this team, they're going to all play both spots. I mean, they're going to shift their fronts to where Howard Cross is lining up over the guard and Riley Mills is lining up over the center. So it's not as important as it was like in 2012 where the nose was the nose. I mean, just you always Lewis Nix was going to be in some version of an inside shade over the guards or over the center in some capacity. But that would be the only debate to me because, to your point, I don't want a 6 foot guy at guard. Over the guard. There's a lot of reasons why we can get into, but the length to me at three technique needs to be greater. And so I agree with your point, Tim, is athletically, Howard is a guy that could play that position.
Yeah, I'm going to bet you a nickel that Rubio becomes a little bit more of a playmaker.
I think he could at nose. That's where I'm, because his game is about power, in my opinion. And I hope you're right, because I like Gabriel, and I think he brings a lot of value. I just think I would slide him inside and let him battle noses a little bit more, is all I'm saying. And I think
maybe they will make the adjustments like you referred to, and then it's a wash. It doesn't matter.
But at the end of the day, he's going to be over the guard at times and over the center at times, just the nature of the way they play this defense. Yeah. So it's not something it's sort of like if it was up to me, I would do this, but it's not one of those things I'm banging on the table saying, I cannot believe that they're not moving this guy to nose. It's not one of those things.
And you know what? It makes the opposing offensive line adjust from snap to snap sometimes. Okay, I'm dealing with a 6'5" guy. Now I'm dealing with Cross with his anvils for fists and
really great first step. That's the other thing about Howard Cross.
God, incredible.
Great first
saw that on high school film. Just an incredible player off the snap of the football. Yeah. And love talking to Howard Cross.
The important thing for them is they need those. And another guy that I've been impressed with this spring too, Tim, is Donovan Hinish. He's really impressed me this spring.
I haven't seen that. Tell me about
Yeah,
it.
he's just quick. I mean, he's a more athletic version of Kurt. It is really creepy watching him practice in the 41 jersey because he's built so much like Kurt. It's not quite as big as Kurt was yet when he ended his career, but he's about where Kurt was when Kurt was a redshirt freshman. He's over 280 now. He's got very strong hands, as you'd expect the Heinisch to have very strong hands, but he's really quick. His technique is still a work in progress, and when he
Yeah.
doesn't use his hands, he's very blockable. But when he uses his hands and he's quick off the ball, he's a lot like Howard Cross, but in a bigger body. He's got a really nice first step. And when he comes off low and gets vertical with his first step and then uses his hands enough to keep a guy off of his body, he's hard to block. But then the next, he had a one-on-one yesterday. He just killed Zeke Correll, just smoked him. Then the next rep, he comes in and he runs right down the middle of a guy and he can't get off the block and he just gets soaked up. And you're like, it's just that consistency, right?
Yeah.
He's still learning it,
Yeah.
but the tools are there. I mean, if he's got to give me 5-10 snaps a game, I'm okay with that. And so but it's important because if you can take about 10 snaps per game off of Howard Cross's body, especially against the Navies and the Tennessee States and the Central Michigans and things like that, and this is where the offense is going to help the defense a ton this year. Keeping Howard Cross fresh in November is going to be very important for Notre Dame because he's always been a great September, middle of October guy, and then he just wears down because they have to play him so much. And that's something that hurt Jason Adamiola too, is Jason Adamiola was often banged up by the time we got to November. Because he couldn't take that pounding. But this is also where the offense can help because last year you could not take them off the field because every game was competitive for the most part going into the fourth quarter. This is where if the offense is as good as we think it's going to be, you're going to see the backups playing more against Navy and Tennessee State and Central Michigan, and then a couple other ACC teams that they'll just have a good day against.
What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen to Kiana Ina?
I hope he sticks it out. I mean, they need to find a role for him, in my opinion, because the one thing that part of the reason this team was actually statistically pretty good on defense in a lot of areas last year. I've made this case that if
Notre Dame's in the red zone,
yes, they just not only could they not stop you, they couldn't stop you from scoring a touchdown. And a big part of it is when you got inside the 5, they just could not get big enough to really hold up. Then they'd have to commit resources inside, and then that would open up, slide routes and guys coming open on the perimeter and quarterbacks getting outside, things like that. And I think that there's a role for Aiden Kana'ana as a big boy in some packages that I think you find a home for him. Is he a guy that shows me enough on 1st and 10 to be a guy that can rush the quarterback and give you a dual threat presence? No. Is he a guy that when I'm playing Navy, I might say, hey, I just want you to beat their center up every snap for 15 snaps? Yeah, I am. Am I a guy that when you get in 3rd and 1 or you get into the goal line that I'm going to have part of my goal line package? Absolutely.
He won a goal line job a couple of years ago. Then he hurt his knee. I mean, we've kind of been pulling for him. And when spring started, O'Malley were like, they need this guy. And now it doesn't look as urgent. What do you think? What do you think they're going to get out of Brennan Vernon? I think long-term Brennan Vernon is somebody that I'm high on.
I think Brennan Vernon is not nearly the ready-made player that a lot of, I think, fans maybe think that he is. I think Brennan's a very raw player with a high ceiling. I'm with you on that. Whether it's just a big end or a 3 technique, his body's going to determine that. Like right now, he projects more as like a pure big end in a similar fashion to like the way that you were going to use like Riley last year, but he's got a little bit more natural edge ability, I think, than maybe Riley did or Riley did by last year because Riley had put on a bunch of weight from when he was in high school. I think he's got a very high ceiling. I just think I think all 3 of those kids. I mean, it's kind of funny, Tim. I had Armo Mukum and Boubacar Traore were 2 of my 3 lowest ranked recruits in last year's defensive class because I do it 2 ways. I kind of here's my ranking now, and then here's my upside ranking.
Right.
They were both in the top 3 or 4 of the upside ranking because the ceilings are incredibly high. It's just they're probably going to need time, and Brennan Brennan is that kind of guy. I don't know if Brennan's going to be able to help right away.
No, I'm not saying that.
Same with Boubacar, but I love the length. I love the athletic talent they bring. I think if Brennan Vernon gets coached, I think he's got a chance to be very good. And I feel the same way about Boubacar. If Boubacar gets coached and puts in the work. And the reason I don't question Brennan's work as much as Boubacar's because I know that family more. I don't know Boubacar at
Yeah.
all. So when I question Boubacar, it's more of a not knowing as opposed to knowing something bad about him. So it's really just I don't know him very well.
Yeah,
He missed his senior
understandable.
year.
I'm real high on Traore.
Yeah.
I think his upside is really, really high. I
Yeah.
get what you're saying.
Just don't
But
know enough about him. The
we haven't
tools are
seen him
great.
play a whole ton of
He
football.
was my number one guy on my upside board. So like I do a second ranking at the
Yeah,
bottom of my
no,
where I put
that makes total sense to
yeah.
me.
Yeah, I mean the tools are there. It's great. I mean 80+ inch wingspan, really twitchy first step, really explosive first step, just learning the game. So there's some reinforcements there that for down the road, and I do like that. I love Owen Wafel, for example. I absolutely love Owen Wafel's film. To me, Owen Wafel is Howard Cross athletically in Kurt Heinrich's body. That's how I feel about Owen Wafel.
Yeah.
That's how I see him. At least as a junior, I didn't love his sophomore film. I loved his junior film. So D line, I think, is trending in the right direction. I've never been worried about Viper between Batoho and Tuialamaka and Josh Burnham. I've never been worried about Viper. I've liked what I've seen. We didn't see him yesterday a ton, but I liked what I've seen from Javante Jean-Baptiste so far. I think he brings a lot more playmaking ability to that big end position, something they have not had since Adi Takumba Ogundiji left. They've just had guys that are good edge setters. I mean, that's what Myron Tungavaloa Mosa was in 2021. He was just an edge setter, and he was good at it. Riley was a good edge setter last year. Nana was a very good edge setter last year, but we didn't see a ton of pass rushing production outside of Riley occasionally. I think what Javante brings is a guy that can get after the quarterback in your base downs, in my opinion, and also holds up on the edge. And then that allows Nana to stay in a rotation role where he's ideally suited, because Nana as a run defender is pretty darn good most of the time. At times he'll get overwhelmed a little bit by size, but he's just not a guy you really necessarily want to have to rely on to get after the quarterback.
Well,
That's my thing there.
I thought Osafa Mensah really, really showed himself as an edge setter, but pass rush is not a natural thing to him. My concern with Jean Baptiste is, and that's why when I first heard that Notre Dame was thinking strong side end, it's like, how's he going to hold up against the run? There's no doubt about him as a pass rusher. I mean, he was born to rush the passer, and I think to a large extent that's true with Botello. But I've just seen too many times in practice the image in my head of him getting swallowed up by an offensive tackle. Now, the problem is that most of those times it's been Fisher and especially Alt. And I mean, Alt is clearly a first round draft choice. And so, yeah, you're going to run into that. But Botello, per snap was really, really good rushing the passer last year. That reminds me of, I didn't say anything about Kaiser when you were talking about Kaiser, but Kaiser per snap is a huge playmaker.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about the defensive line, but obviously there's still some concern because the teams that are playing for national titles are churning out first and second round draft choices on the D line. Does Notre Dame have a first or second round draft choice on the D line?
That's a good question.
I don't think they do. And
I do know that there's a lot of NFL teams that are very intrigued by Riley Mills.
Well,
just because physically Riley looks like the dude that you see at Georgia and Alabama.
I agree. And he could be a guy if he continues to trend like the image that we got yesterday of him. And you felt in the first long open practice, and that would be the guy. I don't know about first or second round. I'm not really sure how many draft choices are on that D line.
Well, the problem, Tim, is a lot of the most NFL talent is the young guys. I mean, there's not a Viper with more NFL talent than Josh Burnham, but is Josh Burnham ready to play this year or not? I mean, that's the question mark, right? That's the big thing. I mean, Howard Cross is a really good college player, but he doesn't have an NFL body.
No.
And a lot of your NFL talent is the guys we just talked. Tyson Ford has an NFL body, and he's just a long way away from being an NFL football player right now.
Yeah.
Josh Burnham is that kind of guy. Boubacar Traore has first-round NFL draft pick talent. Brendan Vernon has day 2 NFL draft pick talent. They're just a long way away from being those guys. And that's kind of the question mark. But that's kind of why I feel like there's 2 ways to look at it, Tim, right? Because teams winning national championships are putting first-round guys in the NFL. We've seen it with Clemson in 2018. We saw it with with obviously Alabama in 2020, Georgia the last 2 years. There's other ways to win, and I think that's where Notre Dame's because I thought Notre Dame defensively in 2018, when you looked at their front seven, had a front seven capable of winning a championship and a secondary that was capable of it for defense if they didn't lose anyone, right? And there wasn't to me, Jerry Tiller was overdrafted. He was not a first round. Jerry Tiller had a monster game against Stanford.
Totally agree.
None of those guys were first and second round picks, but they had so many. They were throwing so many NFL bodies at people, right? And so even though Adi Tecumbo wasn't that guy, Aquara wasn't that guy, Dalen Hayes wasn't that guy, Khalid Kareem wasn't that guy, but they were all really good football players, and they just threw waves at you. And I think that's where Notre Dame has to be.
Yeah, I mean, those are NFL. Those are all NFL players,
right? But they were fifth-round picks and third-round picks, and that's my point is. No, they don't have a Jalen Carter. And if they're going to play like they need a Jalen Carter, then they're going to struggle. What Notre Dame needs, what's going to work for them is can you throw just the waves of it? But what did that group have, Tim? This goes back to what you were saying earlier. Were they elite talents? No, but you know what they all were? Freaking long.
Yep.
They were all really, really long. And that's what's been lacking the last couple of years, in my opinion, was just that you just didn't have the same body types, and that's what they're getting. That's what Marcus Freeman has been focusing on. I mean, since he's got here, outside of Heinisch, because it's always good to bring a Heinisch in there, because Kirk played on that team too. But Tyson Ford's really long and big. Aiden Gobyer's really long.
I was just going to say,
and all four, he had a great pass rush against Tosh Baker. He just destroyed Tosh Baker yesterday. But he's still probably a year away. But you're getting to that point. So to me, Notre Dame this year, I don't think is going to have a championship caliber defense because they have one elite guy in the front seven. It's going to be because you have to be really good everywhere, even though you're not great anywhere, but can you be really good everywhere? Because the one thing I do expect Notre Dame to have this year, Tim, and again, at safety, you're in a position where you're a lot like you were at corner in 2018. If everybody stays healthy, you're going to be fine. You lose one guy, or one guy doesn't play up expectations, you're in trouble. Yeah, but their cornerback room is as good as anybody in the country. And it is amazing. I said it yesterday, and I'll say it here with Tim Priester as my witness. If Notre Dame doesn't proactively give Mike Mickens a ginormous pay raise this offseason, then they're just not doing this whole building a football program thing correctly. Because he has been a miracle worker as a recruiter and a coach.
He really has been. Well, they gave him the passing game coordinator, which means a bump in title means
a bump.
Bump in.
I'm not talking about a bump. I'm talking about I'm being hyperbolic a little bit, but that guy needs to get paid because the point is, Tim, the job he's doing this is a team where the starting cornerback on your playoff team in 2020 is fighting hard to be your number 4 corner in 2023 in Clarence Lewis.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, he's done a tremendous job. I don't know that Mike Mickens is a coordinator. I mean, there's always that assumption that, he's doing, or like, I think Brian Mason, he's going to be a head coach someday. I don't know about that. I know
never talked to Brian Mason.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Mason's a little bit,
interesting cat.
Yeah, he is. He's a very interesting cat, and he's a special teams coach. So I don't know that translates to head coach, and I don't know that it translates to coordinator for Mike Mickens, but you are absolutely right. He's a great cornerbacks coach, and he's done wonders at Notre Dame. And that's why when I look at the corners, I expect Jaden Mickey to take a significant step up this year. I mean, it became
he had a good day yesterday, Tim.
I think so. I think, mentally and emotionally, last season became a real struggle. When I was rewatching the USC game and some of the stuff that he was put up against, I felt really bad for him at that point because he just wasn't equipped, and Caleb Williams is playing catch me if you can and making it impossible to defend their receivers for an entire, 35 seconds that the play is going on, but yeah, no, Mickens has done a great job, and I expect Mickey to. I don't know how much Mickens had to do with Morrison. Certainly, he
recruited him. That's the thing, that's right?
We hand out blame, and so you have to hand out credit. Right. Benjamin Morrison was probably going to develop anyway, but what an absolutely tremendous.
But to me, the win, Tim, there, because sometimes you say, well, that guy was really talented. Well, they haven't recruited guys like that very often. And
No,
you
no
give
doubt.
him credit for, because when they got a commitment, for all the people that just get mad every time Notre Dame lands a 3-star, Benjamin Morrison was a 3-star recruit when he committed to Notre Dame. Now, I thought that was absurd, and I know you thought that was absurd. I had him as a top 100 recruit.
Yeah.
But you still had to beat Nick. It's not like they went and found him. He's not like Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, who Mike Elko and Clark Lee were recruiting at Wake. They come to Notre Dame and like, we're going to steal that kid, where you have to beat out Michigan State and Virginia to get him.
Yeah.
You had to beat out Nick Saban and Jimmy Lake, the two best D-back coaches in college football at the time, to get Benjamin Morrison. And as Mike Elko will tell you, Washington kills Notre Dame in the secondary. Because remember, Mike Elko desperately wanted Kyler Gordon. I mean, he was the top cornerback on Mike Elko's board. And then he couldn't beat Jimmy Lake for him. And he goes out and becomes a high NFL draft pick. Trent McDuffie goes to Texas to get him, turns him into a high. His ability to identify and coach secondary was tremendous at Washington. And my thing is, Mike Mickens at Notre Dame is showing that same type of ability, that I can identify talent. Sometimes it's in the shape of an obvious guy, but then sometimes it's in the shape of a Benjamin Morrison that the rest of the nation doesn't necessarily know about. And so do I give him credit for making him an All-American to the degree that he turned a mediocre talent into an All-American? No, he didn't. He's not having to put like in 2020, Tim, he was not a cornerbacks coach. He was a guy that was just kind of going around trying to put all the, duct tape over all the leaks in the boat, essentially, at corner that year. I got to patchwork this thing together and do the best we can. And when they finally went up against a receiving corps that had legit dudes, there was nothing they could do about it. I mean, there was no call to make when you're trying to ask Clarence Lewis to cover Devontae Smith or Nick McLeod to cover those.
Here or some kind of
okay. You're all good. I didn't think you were waving at me. So it's about bringing the talent in, but then you've got to coach that talent up, and that's what he's done a great job of, in my opinion. And you look at Cam Hart's going to be back. I thought Cam, a lot of fans, I think, look at the way he played against North Carolina and Ohio State and just kind of project that on his entire year. But if you look at from BYU on, Cam Hart was outstanding late in the year last year, which is why everybody kept throwing to Benjamin Morrison, because you're like, why do they keep throwing to that guy? Well, what's the alternative? The 6'3" dude that just blows things up to the field? Like, pick
you're
your poison
right
at
that point. When you don't see much of, when you're watching the game on TV and you don't see much of Cam Hart in the picture, that means they don't want any part of him. And right. At a certain point, it's like, okay, when are you going to stop throwing to Benjamin Morrison? But you get that as why an opponent would want to do that. But to me, and that was always kind of Jalen Elliott and Alohi Gilman. Like, okay, are they knocking down? Are they batting away 15 passes? No, it's because they don't really want to throw the ball in their area for fear of what they might do. So I think that's Cam Hart. Cam Hart is absolutely crucial to this upcoming season, and he's so vulnerable and so always on the edge of another shoulder injury. And that was why, like we were talking about Clarence Lewis, I just don't think that you have you talked early on about having to have a bunch of great corners. And not that he's a great corner, but he is the backup nickel, and he's done a lot of positive things over the course of the last 3 seasons. But I don't think you can afford to move him, because you don't know whether you're going to have Cam Hart for games. You just do not.
As long as Christian Gray is healthy, I do, right?
Yeah, so I understand that,
because you've got Benjamin Morrison, you've got Jaden Mickey emerging, you've got Thomas Harper in the nickel, you've got Chance Tucker, who's a guy that I like, and you'll have Micah Bell show up. Well, I think Micah Bell's probably not a guy that you necessarily want to throw anywhere other than nickel as a true freshman, but that speed will play. That I think you almost have to move him at this point. Just my opinion. Now, if Christian Gray goes down and you have another injury, and okay, now we're having a different conversation. But my whole thing is I get the what if factor, but if that happens, you can always move Clarence Lewis back. I think what it's going to determine is I think Notre Dame is confident they're going to get someone in the portal. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Do you see Thomas Harper? I mean, he probably is just a nickel, right?
He can play nickel as part of he can play safety as part of a package as the nickel. So you're going to roll down and do some of that. But as a full-time nickel, I don't see that. I mean, a full-time safety, I should say, I don't see that. Plus, here's the thing too, Tim.
Yeah.
You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, in that regard. Because now you're not you recruited him here. Why did you bring in Thomas Harper? Because you watched film and said, we're losing a pretty good nickel. Tyreek Bracy was a pretty darn good nickel for Notre Dame last year. And we talk about that USC game. Notre Dame not only didn't have Cam Hart in that game, they didn't have Tyreek Bracy in that game.
O'Malley and I are sitting in the Coliseum and the first defensive snap, and it's like, oh my God, they don't have Bracy either. And it's
like, how do you stop this offense?
And Hart was already out, so you basically knew that Caleb Williams was about to.
Which then took Benjamin Morrison out of the game because they just were never going to throw at him.
Right.
And they didn't. They didn't have to at that point in time. So you're bringing in Thomas Harper, whose numbers were even better than Tyreek Bracy's last year and whose film, in my opinion, was really good. You go look at the TCU game. Everybody talks about that big comeback. Go look at when that comeback started. It was the series after Thomas Harper got knocked out of the game. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
And then when he got hurt, the defense just kind of fell apart after that. Now, again, it's not just because of him. There was other things leading to that, but it played a big role. And you're now taking away from that to work him at safety. He needs every rep he can, in my opinion, especially as he's been out this spring, to work as the nickel. Because when you look at Notre Dame's schedule this year, they're going to have to be a lot more nickel reliant this season than they were a year ago. Because you already have Clemson, Ohio State, and USC, who are all teams you got to play nickel against. But now you've got Louisville and Jeff Brom. That's a nickel team. You look at Duke with Riley Leonard. That's a nickel team. Wake Forest, that's a nickel team. Navy's I don't know what the heck you want to call whatever your defense is against Navy. So all the teams that you mentioned earlier, Tim, with the exception of Pitt, are all teams that you're going to need. And now Stanford is going to this type of offense they were running at Sacramento State, which is an offense that you're going to be needing to play a lot more nickel against. So your primary top opponents that you need to beat if you want to go win a championship are teams where your base defense is essentially going to be your nickel. And I don't want to take away from that. It's not an easy answer anywhere, Tim, unless they're able to go out in the portal and find a guy that can be a starting caliber safety at Notre Dame.
Did I see Josh DeBerry's available from BC? I
believe so, but he's to me also more of a nickel.
He is.
Now, if you bring him in at nickel and you feel confident that Thomas Harper can be more of a safety, now you might be in a situation where you can do that.
I'm not sure that's.
I don't think that's ideal because Thomas Harper, you've seen Thomas Harper. He's not very big.
Thomas Harper's a nickel, absolutely.
Yeah, he's not he built more like Tyreek Bracy than he is Brandon Joseph.
Yes,
as a safety. So, but I love what I've seen from Xavier Watts this spring. I mean, he's going to be an impact player.
I totally agree. I think he is fast tracking to a big time performance in 23-24.
He's so athletic, and that's the thing is they've had some really smart, good athletes at safety. I think he's one of the more explosive athletes they've had at safety in recent years. I really do, and he's starting to get more and more comfortable there. Ramon Henderson's a better version of himself, meaning he's still going to have those snaps. You're just like, dude, what are you doing? That's just what I kind of come to the point that we're just always going to have to deal with that with Ramon. But they're fewer and far between, and he's making a few more plays. DJ Brown is a guy that if you can keep him in a niche role, it's fine. You just can't have him in a role where you're asking him to cover people a whole lot. You just got to use him correctly.
Or to make an open field tackle.
Right. But that's the whole point, though. That's where you're in that pickle at safety because – it's like Ben Minich is a number 2 at safety right now. And we hear how good he's doing it in spring. We haven't seen a lot, but it's to my original point, Tim. You don't want a safety to be in the 2 deep because you have no other options. You want a guy to be in the 2 deep because he's done so well that I almost feel like the people I talk to at Notre Dame are kind of trying to convince me or convince themselves that he's ready to play right now. And maybe he will be by August. I mean, I like Ben Minich as a player. I just feel like when you're talking to me about how, he's that sounds more like you're trying to convince yourself that as opposed to necessarily him without question after 9 practices clearly being ready to be.
He's a little guy, man. He is not a very big guy. And of course, all of this, not that you would want to throw freshmen into the fray, but if you had Peyton Bowen and Brandon Hillman, it would be a completely different.
Right. And a healthy Adon Schuler. I mean, because now you've got bodies. Now you've got some bodies. And you say, okay, of this group of 4 guys, somebody is going to be able to help us.
And
There's no doubt.
Minnick's got didn't he break his thumb? He's got something
Yeah, he
going
was
on
out
right now.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Which a thumb is a safety on whatever. I mean,
yeah,
you're suck it up, tape it up, put the
yeah,
cast on it,
yeah.
you're going to be okay.
Not
But I say
every
that
player
somewhat
is already
jokingly.
in that
Yeah.
mindset, but he's gonna have to be.
But that's the one question mark I still have at safety, because here's where you don't want to be. And at the end of the day, as we wrap this up, Tim, here's my biggest takeaway from the spring. This Notre Dame football team. Are they where they need to be yet? No. Neither is anyone else. Did you watch Michigan's spring game? They're also still a work in progress. Wait till you see Ohio State's offensive line this weekend. They're still a work in progress. That's the nature of the spring. Having said that, the thing that gives me more confidence about this season being good. Now, how good, we'll find out. But the reason I'm very optimistic about this team is because last year for me, it was if this, and this happens, this team's got a chance to be really good. But there were just so many ifs where if that doesn't work out, the drop-off was pretty substantial. And the way I feel about this team is, with the exception of offensive tackle and safety, there are so many more situations where if Tobias Merriweather gets hurt for a couple games, or let's say he's just a year away from being a star, it's not like your receiving core has nothing. It's not him, and then you're turning to a walk-on who can't play at this level, or a Daniel Smith or something. I mean, you've got guys that can play, and I guess that's kind of where I come from and say my optimism comes from the fact that you could go down to your fourth running back and be fine. You could go down to you could have to play, say what you want about the starting veteran linebackers, whatever the case may be. But if for some reason they're not there, I feel a lot better about what's pushing them and what's coming to them better. And I say that in a lot of positions. And the reason that's important, Tim, is because football is not a game where everything goes according to plan. With the exception of like maybe LSU 2019, stuff happens. The other part of that too, Tim, is competition is a wonderful thing. And the reality is there's been too many years at Notre Dame where there wasn't real competition because the kids aren't stupid. And they know that you can tell me all you want that there's a competition at corner, but we all know that Low Wood's not pushing the other starting cornerback's first starting job, with all due respect to Low Wood. That's just – so this guy's not pushing that guy. You can say all you want, but I'm the starter because that guy's not any good.
Right.
And that's just how young people are sometimes. Not everybody, but you can't take a day off now. You can't. I don't care who you are. You can't take a day off because there's somebody breathing down your neck that's going to make you better. And I think those are the two reasons for me why I'm just optimistic that this team doesn't need to hit the inside straight on everything going right for this team to be a really darn good football team.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, as we walk away from this, impact D-line performance and everything that you said about safety and the depth. And I mean, to me, those are the two keys, because I think offensively, when all is said and done, but the last time Notre Dame averaged 40 points a game?
They never have.
1912.
1912 they did? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I thought the 60, that must be the modern record then. The year in the 60s they scored 37.6, I thought was the record.
Well, yeah. I mean, they officially started keeping NCAA stats in 46.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, believe it or not, I didn't cover the 46 season. I really.
Well, I was going to ask you if you covered the 1912 season, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to offend you.
That was when they were beating Haskell 73-0 in South Bend High School.
John L. Marks was the head football coach.
John L. Marks was the head coach when
they
averaged. It was like 48 a game.
Yeah, and they scored 116 points that year against St. Viator. Theater.
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to see them score that this year.
No, but with Hartman and all the components they have offensively, they should be in the upper 30s. And we both know that it's not how much you average per game, because you can beef up on the Central Michigans, and
2019 is a great example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's do you score enough to win at NC State? Do you score enough to beat, an upstart Duke or teams like that? And then
Ohio State, Clemson on the road,
Clemson and USC, especially. That's when your average, really, really matters.
Right, because to your point, Tim, 2019 was Notre Dame's best most points ever scored for a team. Now, again, they played a lot more games.
Yeah.
That 2019-12 team played 7 games. By the way, I want to say this against St. Viator, Adrian, Morris Harvey, Wabash. I coached against Wabash, Pitt, St. Louis, and Marquette. So a lot of teams that don't have football anymore. So I can say that I coached and beat a team that Notre Dame also coached.
You were all over it, man.
I'm there, man. But in all seriousness, it's those things where you can go score 66 on New Mexico and score 50, was it 9 against Bowling Green, and score a mess of points against a bad Duke team, and score a mess of points against BC, who wasn't very good that year. But then you score 17 against Georgia and 14 against Michigan. I don't really care what your points per game were. Right. I don't care that you set some record, because it's about, can you score those points when it matters? And that's where Notre Dame has been missing for years. And that's the one thing that I thought made that 2015 team so dangerous, is because they were going to score on you. And then they did score enough points to put themselves in position to win 2 of the 3 games they played. They were so beat up on offense against Ohio State in a bowl game. But, the offense put itself in position to make some plays late in that game against Clemson. The offense put themselves in position to beat Stanford that year. I mean, you score a touchdown to go up with 30 seconds left, you feel like you've done your job, right?
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with the 05 team. It's been very rare that Notre Dame could go into a season and say, hey, we just got to make some stops because we can score on people. I mean, that 05 team, if they could just make stops, they're undefeated and playing for a national championship that year. I mean, they just couldn't make stops against Michigan State, and they couldn't make a stop late against USC. And you hope that's where they have to get to. I mean, look, Tim, I made this point earlier this week. The notion that defense wins championships is just not a real thing anymore in college football. My stance is defense will get you to the show. But if you want to truly win a championship, you got to be able to score. The 2 losing teams in the playoff games last year scored 45 and 41 points. Now, the counters, Georgia held TCU to 7. Yeah, but Georgia's the standard. If I want to beat Georgia, that means I had to score 66 to beat Georgia, right?
Right, yeah.
That's the point. And you've got to be able to score in those games. Now, do you need to make stops? Sure. Georgia could make stops late against Ohio State. Ohio State could make stops on Georgia late. I get that. But it's not, the days of the 10-3 title game between Oklahoma and Florida State it's just not part of football anymore. It may cycle back someday. But right now, I don't care how good your Notre Dame's defense is. The defense will get them to the playoff if it's as good as I hope it'll be. Because I think an 11-1 season this year gets Notre Dame in the playoff. I do. As long as the loss isn't like some 35-point beatdown at home to Ohio State or USC or at Clemson or something like that. But to win it all, which is always the goal, should always be the goal at Notre Dame, you've got to be able to score and score on the good teams. And that's where I feel like will it be this year or not? We'll find out. But they're trending in a direction that you're going to get there because of what they're doing at the quarterback position, at the receiver position, and at running back position, because it got dark there for a while in the Autry Denson era. With all due respect to him as a player, I would say it, pretty useless recruiter. But since Lance Taylor and Dylan McCullough have kind of teamed up, and Tommy Rees as well, the running back room is stacked. It's been a long time since they're as deep as they've been at running back. I mean, back in the days when I was reading, you and Lou at Blue and Gold is the last time I remember them being this deep at running back. And receiving core is getting there. The tight end room is there. The O-line is there. But it's the quarterback and receiver recruiting that has changed things. Now we need to find out if they can develop that into an elite offense. That's the big question. Yeah. And we can say whatever we want about practice, Tim, but it's not until we get to games and see it that you really say, okay.
Yeah. And then elite talent along the defensive line with depth and size that we talked about as well. So it's building in that way. And I think both you and I are very confident in Marcus Freeman and what he's doing. He is a Pied Piper. He has the ability to get people to follow him. I almost kind of astonished at the blind faith that a lot of people had in him last season. Going into the season, they love Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman's genuine. He's real. He's tougher on players than I think fans realize, because you always hear him, saying real positive things about his players and being real upbeat. But I think when it comes time to get the job done on the practice field, in fact, there have been some injuries along the way that have probably occurred because their practices have been so physical since he became defensive coordinator a couple of years ago. So, looking forward to it's fun to cover him. It's fun to be around him. They certainly make it a lot easier for the media to cover them in terms of access to interviews and stuff like that. Um, how about an impromptu, fully open practice
Yeah,
yesterday?
that was nice. I have been very hard on the Notre Dame media department because I think there's a lot of missed opportunities to bring even more coverage and things, not just from us, but from things they need to be doing. Yesterday was pretty awesome and appreciated. Because they didn't have to. I mean, the thing I always said is I don't like what Notre Dame does, but we're not entitled to be at practices.
I do not
It's
feel
not a right.
no, I do not feel
Right.
after having done this for 41 years, I'm not entitled. Why would we
Right.
be entitled? I
Right.
don't feel that way. And I didn't.
So
Brian Kelly didn't give us hardly any access to certainly assistant coaches
right.
and players and practice. You know what? It's not our ball to play with, man. I
Right.
mean,
Now I can
sure.
critique it because for me it comes from an NFL NIL standpoint, and I don't necessarily want to dive. We can maybe discuss this another time, Tim,
Well,
and have you back. But
they need to promote their NIL. They need to promote fund
right.
in a much better way. We've been
It,
trying to get a hold of the nutritionist. We've
right.
been trying to do an interview with the nutritionist since August. Now,
Right.
do you want people to talk about Notre Dame's nutrition and how they're doing it, or do you not?
Right.
Apparently, they do not. I remember when they first hired, I can't remember the gentleman's name about NIL. I tried to get an interview right away. No, he's not ready to do it, and he's left. He's gone. He hasn't even.
Yeah.
He never did an interview before he left. That if you
Yeah.
want these things to take off,
Right.
you need to give credence to them.
Right.
That part I would agree
And
with.
you have to understand that getting yourself out on socials constantly is good for your brand and good for your players. And that's my whole point is like, if you don't want to let us be at more practices, my thing is like these mic'd up things, they need to be doing stuff like that and practice highlights and more of that stuff every single practice. And
I don't know about every
that's,
practice, but they do. I mean, they do it a lot.
I,
Don't.
I
Yeah,
don't, they're starting to. I don't think that they do it, especially when you look at like what other teams are doing.
yeah.
Like UMass is doing like really cool stuff. That's my whole point. But as
Well,
far
but
as
you're
practice
probably
access, I appreciated the fact that they because they made the switch last minute, right? Which for some people impacted their ability to be at practice yesterday. But it's again, I can say, hey, I don't agree with something, and I think they should do it more and state my case. But I also understand and appreciate that they don't owe us any practice access at all. And so when they give us a full practice, and then they explained why, Tim, did you hear why they
no,
switched it up?
no.
So they're going to have a big scrimmage on Saturday.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, I did
And
know.
so Friday is going to be kind of a walk through, not a lot day. And they didn't feel it'd be right since we're so limited in practice that be one of the four we see. And that be and you know what? I appreciated the heck out of that because
no doubt.
I don't think that would have happened under the
No,
previous
definitely not.
regime.
Definitely not. No.
And so I respected that. So if I'm going to criticize you for something that I don't think you're doing a good enough job at, and when you do it right, I'm going to praise it. And I was very appreciative of what we saw because
No,
Tim,
agree.
they went over. They went like Alan looked at us at one point in time. He's like, y'all know practice was supposed to end a little while ago. Like they stopped the clock of the periods. They just turned it to 0 because they coach didn't feel like they'd gotten enough work in. And they just had a couple, maybe 10 extra minutes of practice, just getting the scrimmages done. That was appreciated, and we got a chance to see a lot yesterday,
No,
which
it's all
I was
good.
very
They
happy.
don't. I mean, I realize that we as a profession tend to feel entitled about stuff more so when I was younger. I'm mellowing. It's like, man, it is. It's your football. You determine when we can
Yeah,
play with it, and it's all good. But Marcus
yeah,
Freeman, I think that it's a consensus among the media that you sure would like to see a guy like that
yeah.
succeed because I think his heart's in the right place. He came in appreciating and understanding Notre Dame instead of trying to
Yeah.
change it. Bob
And it was
Davie,
real, Tim. It was
yeah,
real. Like you can
yeah.
say all
No,
the right things.
you know what? You know why I think that is, Brian? Because he chose Notre Dame was his second choice as a player,
Mhm.
and I think that as a teenager he understood Notre Dame, and so certainly as a young football coach, he's not trying to fight Notre Dame all the time. Bob Davie tried to fight Notre Dame.
Right.
Brian Kelly certainly initially tried to fight Notre Dame. Notre Dame is unique. I know younger generations of fans think that Notre Dame should have a win at all cost approach to football, which you just don't. I don't understand.
You can't lose what makes you unique
Well,
in order to win.
it's hard for me to understand how they became Notre Dame fans, because when I grew up watching Notre Dame football, and I say this all the time, yes, it was easy to be a Notre Dame fan when you lived in South Bend and they won national titles when you were 6, 13, and 17. That was the experience.
Just rub it in, Tim. Why don't you? Just rub it into all of us who have experienced one title in our lives.
But we also took great pride in the fact that
right.
Notre Dame's doing things differently academically. Yeah. Notre Dame does things differently. And if that sometimes causes you to lose, back then it was appreciated because you knew that Notre Dame clearly was turning out student athletes.
Where I would love to maybe have a discussion with you on the show one time, and I'll just say this, and we'll move on to the mailbag next, because I want to get to some of these questions that people have for us. I think that there is a balance between the two factions that I see in this debate. The one faction is, and I'm not saying you're here because I don't know enough about your position here, is the whole, well, this is the way it's always been done type of thing. And then there's the faction of the, well, this is what Alabama's doing and this is what Ohio State is doing. And that kind of drives me nuts, because my whole thing is, why'd you become a Notre Dame fan? I became a Notre Dame fan not just because they were winning when I was a kid, because Tim, my formative years as a Notre Dame fan was 88 to 93. It was a lot shorter than what you went through, but it was pretty good. But one of the things that I always prided myself on, especially growing up in Ohio around Ohio State and Michigan fans, was that Notre Dame did win different. And my whole point is, I don't want Notre Dame to get into the NIL sphere for recruiting. I don't want that. I don't. That's just not something I'm interested in Notre Dame doing. NIL for your current team, flat out do maximum of what you can do. I don't want Notre Dame to bringing in a kid who's a phenomenal athlete that's a 2-2 and has no interest in going to class. None. I have zero interest in that. Because if you're not developing young, you know me well enough to know, Tim, that I take the coaching aspect of it very seriously when it comes to, your job is not only to win football games. Your job is to develop young men. And that is something I take great pride in. My whole point is, I think there's certain things that the school has stubbornly viewed as, we can't do this because of whatever reason we're Notre Dame, that there shouldn't be. There's no reason you can't have a top 5 paid coaching staff. There's no reason you can't have a top 5 support staff, because the way I look at it is, all those things ultimately are better for the players. There's no reason you can't have the best, a top 5 nutrition program and food program and all these other things that to me are player centric. I don't need them to have a freaking slide in the football facility. Like, I don't care about that. I don't care that they have all these little gimmicky stuff. Yes, you need updated facilities, but I don't need all that crap, because this is Notre Dame. This is a serious place. I want you making extra study halls as opposed to putting a slide up. It's the stubbornness when it comes to some of the things that there's just no reason to be stubborn there. That's where I would come in. And to me, academically, it's not so much my beef. I think we could pick a kid here and there and say they should have let that kid in. But then you could counter with, but they let that kid in. So they have clearly shown exceptions and allowed the staff to get in. So it's not like every kid's a 3-4, you can't get into Notre Dame. So I get tired of that. I think there's also this misconception that you can't have talent if you don't bring in guys with low grades. There's plenty of kids. You and I know this, Tim. How many kids at Clemson in 2018 could have been standouts in the classroom at Notre Dame that would have helped that team? Trevor Lawrence couldn't have. Christian Wilkins flat out was a Notre Dame fit academically. You just didn't recruit him because you didn't put a good enough product on the field.
Right.
So my whole thing is, there's enough guys out there that if you recruit the right way, you don't need to bring in 10 exceptions to your football team, academic exceptions. Well, hey, let me get these 5-2-2 kids and we're going to go win a title. I don't want to win that way.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a Notre Dame fan. If I wanted to win that way, I'd go root for Alabama.
No, I agree. And look, I'm of the generation where, this is the way it's always been at Notre Dame. Yeah, I was part of that group at one point too, because Notre Dame they were competing with the best in the country and they were winning in the 60s and 70s and certainly well before that and stuff. But I believe that you're absolutely right in terms of, and I think the Notre Dame is changing. Notre Dame has changed tremendously in terms of being open-minded about, okay, looking at it this way, looking at it that way. Highest paid coaching staff? It doesn't have to be the highest paid, but it needs to be competitive, and it is now. I believe it is now, at least among coordinators.
Right.
and the head coach as
But that's
well.
not, they're not losing coordinators to other coordinator jobs, with the exception of Tommy Rees. But Tommy Rees's thing was not about money.
No, it was
Like,
preparation. Yeah, no, I get that. And I
right.
don't, I don't have any. If Tommy Rees wanted to leave to go to Alabama, so be it.
Right.
I
I
just
have no
don't.
problem with that. I just, there were some people saying, well, Notre Dame, has to do this. Well, they didn't lose Tommy Rees because of money.
Well, and if
Tommy Rees made an
point,
understandable decision that we all make, that this getting to coach for Nick Saban is going to help me become a better coach. I have no problem with that.
no, absolutely.
None.
And Brian Kelly wanted his contract extended. Well, I really didn't blame Notre Dame not
Agreed.
wanting to extend it further because they had probably maximized things
Right.
with him. I get that. As far as you mentioned exceptions in the classroom, I am a little bit hesitant to make direct comparisons because we don't have any idea Chris Zorich versus Brandon Hillman, Tony Rice, and
Right.
all the specifics. When I went to Notre Dame, when I was a student at Notre Dame, one of my jobs was in the admissions department. It was, and just clerical work and stuff to earn a little bit of money. So I do. We can't, I cringe a little bit when I hear, well, Brandon Hillman, but you did this for him. We don't know the transcript. We don't know all the ins and outs of that. And so I'm a little hesitant to make that statement, but things that many of the things that you've mentioned, things that can be controlled. I mean, nutrition, I think the nutrition thing is blown out of proportion. My wife's in food service at Notre Dame. Now the execution of it, because of the way the Goog is made up, the Goog needs to be renovated. The Goog is not preventing Notre Dame from winning national title.
Well, see that's my thing though, Tim, is I have never said it's keeping them from winning titles. And that was my big problem with Brian Kelly. I wrote an article when he had that interview where he talking about a chef. And I'm like, a chef isn't why you decided to call a jet sweep to Chris Brown inside the 5-yard line. A jet sweep, or not having a chef is not why you decided to do a rollout go route when you're in field goal range against Tulsa. Not having a chef is not why you decided to go for 2 against Northwestern when everyone on the planet says that's the dumb decision. So there comes a point in time where you say, is this keeping them from winning a title? No, I think you can still win it because Lou Holtz didn't have top 5 of those things when he was at Notre Dame. My point is you need to start removing the unnecessary roadblocks from your football program.
Totally agree.
That's my point.
Well,
and things that don't cause you to sacrifice what you believe in.
I totally agree with that, Brian. And as God is my witness, I promise you that what the football team eats is totally dictated by the football program.
Sure. Well, yeah. The delivery system is not where it needs to be, as you mentioned. The thing is, we could debate this all day. I'll just say it's not where it needs to be. It's not terrible. It's not going to keep you from beating Ohio State this year. It's not going to keep you from beating Clemson this year. That's my whole thing, right? We can talk about, is it good enough or not, and you and I are going to have to agree to disagree on that. But neither of us are going to sit there and say, I'm just saying hypothetically, Tim. I'm not trying to.
I mean,
but neither of us are going to sit there and say you're going to lose to Ohio State because you're not giving your players aren't doing the same thing the Bama's doing.
But I agree that the process should be better. That is a controllable, and it should be better. But I don't know all the reasons why the Goog hasn't been renovated, other than money, other than like dedicated money to that. I don't know. But let's move on.
Honestly, I'll say this: there's one thing that I do agree with Notre Dame on financially that a lot of people don't, and it's why Notre Dame didn't suffer as much during COVID as some other people did, is because Notre Dame has a philosophy that I agree with because I've run my business that way. I'm not going to start a project until I've raised the money to pay for the project.
Well, that's why the Goog hasn't been renovated.
Right. And so we could discuss, well, are they prioritizing that fundraising? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. But I have no problem with that, actually, because I think that's how smart businesses should run. There's so many athletic departments that basically just run off their TV revenue that they don't make smart business decisions. And then when COVID happens, they're like laying off all these people and cutting back to all these other sports because they've been spending irresponsibly for so many years, in my opinion. And so I actually don't have a problem with that. I just wish they would hurry up and raise the money so you can get renovated.
But I grow a little weary of, I have known quite well every athletic director since Moose Krause, who was just an absolute gem of a human being. And I hear, it's I realize it's unpopular to defend Jack Swarbrick these days because he's not doing enough. He's not doing enough. Jack Swarbrick, I mean, he's done just about everything an athletic direct. He's achieved just about everything an athletic director at Notre Dame could possibly achieve. The 12-team playoff that's coming up, there's only one athletic director in the country that impacted that. I mean, like pulling the scheme together, and it was Jack Swarbrick. Jack Swarbrick, and I give Brian Kelly a tremendous amount of credit in 2020, but it's mainly Jack Swarbrick. He's the one that kept the season intact.
Yeah.
When the ACC was ready to shut the season down, he said to the ACC, just be patient a little while longer. And then everything,
because that domino doesn't fall, Tim, there's no 2020 college football. The SEC might have been the only conference to play football.
Notre Dame's preparation for every right hook that COVID threw was absolutely tremendous in 2020. But we don't, because we're a nation of blame, point the finger, you suck, they suck. We're in that mode. Then no credit goes toward those that.
And that's the frustrating thing, Tim, is I have legitimate beefs with Jack Swarbrick. There's no doubt. But what frustrates me is it's we are in this position where if you don't like what he did on A, B, C, and D, then you can't show support for him when he does, A, B, C, D over here. And it's kind of like I get so sick of this. You're absolutely right, Tim, and we're about to go off on tangents. So I'm gonna take us off this ledge here in a second. But to really be able to do this thing correctly, we need to be able to say, hey, this guy did a really good job here, and not diminish it, and then look over here and say, but he didn't do a good enough job over there. It's like Brian Kelly's a perfect example of that. I don't like Brian Kelly very much. I never have. You know that. But I'll also give him all the credit in the world on all the areas where he deserved it. And this program is astronomically different than the one he took over. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. So does Jack Swarbrick. Go back and look at where Notre Dame was in 2012. From a facility standpoint, a staff salary standpoint, just 10 years ago. And then look where they are now. It's unrecognizable.
Well, we're
not talking about where they were in '88. We're just where they were in 2012. It's unrecognizable.
Getting Notre Dame in the ACC when the Big East broke up. Now everybody looks at, the ACC sucks now, and the ACC is not very good in football, and they're not very good in basketball. But 9 years ago, it was an incredible accomplishment. Yeah. And I know, who cares about all the other sports? Well, Notre Dame does. They got
and you should.
I mean, athletically, Notre Dame. They won the Directors' Cup. The men won it 2 years ago. They're one of the best.
Getting the hockey team into the Big Ten has brought so much recognition to the program.
Absolutely. So I'm going on, and nobody's perfect. I'm not saying he's perfect, but Jack Swarbrick has had to deal with more things in his tenure than all the other athletic directors combined.
I agree with that for sure. I do agree with that. I do. Well, the super conferences back in 2011, he was a big reason why that died. He played a big role in why that died.
Yeah.
So
nobody's perfect. I have to look at everybody that I report on. I have to look at it objectively.
Yeah.
And objectively, Jack Swarbrick is the greatest athletic administrator in the history of Notre Dame, and it's really not close other than Dick Rosenthal. Moose Krause is
when was Dick Rosenthal there? What?
Well, he was there for the national title.
Right. When did he leave? Because I was 10 when they won the title in '88.
Mid-90s.
Mid-90s? Okay.
Yeah, Kevin.
I don't remember his tenure a whole lot. Because, again, mid-90s, I was still in high school. Right?
Yeah, Dick Rosenthal's one of the finest human beings
I more remember. Kevin White's probably the first athletic director I remember, because I didn't care about athletic directors when I was 15 years old. So Kevin White's probably the first one that I remember.
I mean, Kevin White, who I respect as a person, his background was more in the other sports. And so, I don't think he was as well equipped to deal with the football aspect of everything. And then you had you know, you had a couple coaching errors there that didn't go very well. But Dick Rosenthal is an awesome human being. In fact, I spoke to him probably about 6 weeks ago. He's now 90 years old.
Wow.
And is just a great man and a great Notre Dame man and a guy that I respect tremendously.
Well, Tim, that was a fun discussion. I do want to get to the mailbag here before we get out of here. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Make sure that you are checking out what we are doing at irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. And you can also find Tim's podcast. Tim, why don't you let people know where they can find the podcast? You guys do what, one show a week?
We do, usually 2 through the spring and then
Okay.
2 during the season. Just go to irishillustrated.com and you'll find us.
Let's dive into the mailbag, Tim. We got some questions here from some folks. They want to ask us some questions, so we're gonna dive these. I'll bring them up, read them, and then give you a shot to answer. And if I want to add something to it, I will, because you know me, Tim. I like to talk a little bit. It's one thing you and I have in common. I've heard that. John A1. If Styles were to move to cornerback and be a legitimate competitor in the room, would that allow both Clarence Lewis and Ryan Barnes to be moved to safety? If both Lewis and Barnes are safeties, what's the recruiting effect?
Well, Styles has to prove that he can play cornerback.
Let's say hypothetically that he does, just for the sake of argument. Let's say he moves the corner and boy, it just fits like a glove.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they dabbled with Barnes at safety a little bit late last year, and then they moved him back to cornerback for the spring. So that may not have. That's a completely different animal. Your angles are different. Your coverages are different. Your responsibilities are different. But in terms of if Styles could, like if you're talking about can Styles step onto the field and be a contributor from day one, well, then you probably have some options with Lewis.
To me, I like Ryan Barnes as a player. I just don't think moving a guy that's never really played a meaningful snap to safety is going to be the answer, because there's going to be a growing period for that, just like there was for Ramon Henderson, just like there was for Xavier Watts. And so I think if they were going to move Lorenzo and give him a role and kind of let him be a niche guy, and you could kind of protect him from certain things, maybe you don't put him in against Ohio State as much or put him in a specific role, that helps, but you're not counting on him to be a difference maker. And whoever you move to safety, you're moving him there because you think he needs to play and be a part of your rotation, because Notre Dame likes to rotate safeties. And so I don't know because here's the thing is I don't believe you move a guy unless you're going to play him. I'm a big believer in that. I don't know what your stance is. You don't move a guy just to fill a depth need if he's playing somewhere else. I don't believe that's right for the player. I don't think that helps your football team. So Clarence Lewis is going to play for Notre Dame this year, and he should. The only way you move him to safety is if you're saying you're going to play there. And that's a little different for Lorenzo, because this is more of a career change, so to speak, if he were to make that move. Because you're not moving Lorenzo to corner just to help out this year. You're moving Lorenzo to corner because you and he have decided this is where your best opportunity is to make an impact now and at the next level. That's the only reason. That's different for what we're talking about with Clarence and Ryan Barnes. So,
yeah, well, clearly, if Styles has any chance of playing in the NFL, it's on the defensive side of the ball.
So it would have to me, it would give me comfort to move one of those two players. I'm moving Clarence. I don't know if I'm necessarily moving Ryan, because right now Ryan Barnes is working in a lot of nickel, and I'd like to say let him develop there instead of trying him to fill a depth need somewhere else. You're going to get a Don Schuler back in the fall. You're going to go get a portal guy. Or at least they're going to try to get a portal guy. I don't know if it's going to be as easy as maybe some people think that it's going to be. I personally would move Clarence Lewis, assuming that Christian Gray is going to be is healthy and is going to be ready to go here soon. He didn't practice yesterday. I think it also helps Clarence Lewis, because I personally believe Clarence Lewis has a better shot at being a professional player as a safety than he does a corner.
I would agree with that.
And so that's the other reason for that too.
I don't think he's going to play professionally either way, but I would agree.
This is his best chance, because he's definitely not a cornerback.
Yep.
And so, because here's the thing, like I think Clarence could maybe develop to a special teams player at the next level, but you have to be able to when you have small rosters in the NFL, you have to be able to do something else than just be a special teams player. We saw times in his career where David Bruton had to start at safety for the Broncos and the Redskins. He wasn't just a special teams player. You got to be able to help out somewhere else, unless you are an absolute wizard as a special teams guy. And that's just not who Clarence Lewis is at this point in time. So It all sounds good on paper. It just there's a lot that would have to go right. And do you have enough time with Lorenzo now to be comfortable enough with that to go there? That's going to be the question mark. But I personally I'd make the Clarence Lewis move anyway. And that's just my 2 cents on that one. We have one from let's see here. Actually, that was a follow-up. We got a 2-parter from Domer Grizz, Tim. Part 1 is it says, is it correct to say that Laurinaitis was the primary linebacker recruiter last year? If not, end of question. If so, 2 follow-ups. And so he was. So we're going to bring up the 2 follow-ups. Number 1, is it common for a GA to have that much responsibility? And 2, does it seem like Gold learned his lesson now that Pierce followed James Laurinaitis to Ohio State, or is he still having Bulla take the lead? So let's go to the first part of that question. Is it common for a GA to have that much responsibility?
No, I don't think so, but it's uncommon to have James Laurinaitis as your GA too.
Correct.
I mean, a guy that was a proven NFL player and a recognizable name. Now, Nick Lazinski had that kind of role when he was at Notre Dame, which is probably why. Did we even talk about this? Which is probably why Prince Kollie will end up at Vanderbilt.
I have been purposely not talking about it just because I don't like to get into that. But yes, I would agree with that sentiment.
That's a strong possibility as it appears right now.
Yeah. Well, and he hasn't been at the last 3 practices we've seen. I mean, it's not it's not going to surprise anybody.
Yeah.
But yes, Nick Lazinski was a guy that was not your it's not common in college football. It's becoming more and more common at Notre Dame, which I think is smart. Like if you're going to hire, because the GA position has evolved so much over time, Tim. I mean, GA, I coached with a guy who was a GA under Fred Akers at Purdue. And he would tell me about what his jobs were like. So apparently Texas gave Fred Akers a Longhorn, a literal Longhorn when he left. That was part of his compensation package. So when he goes to Purdue, he still has this Longhorn. So he's got this farm where he's got this steer. Like he's got this Longhorn, and the GA, my buddy Jeff's job, he's an older guy, was to go over there and take care of the Longhorn. That was part of what he would do.
You mean Laurinaitis wasn't doing that last year?
No. And I mean, even when I first came up, at that level, GAs were just gophers. I mean, you go get me this, go get me that. And it's smart coaches. It's evolved because coaches are getting smarter and they're realizing this is a position where I need to be able to take advantage of because GAs can be on the field working with players. And so you're seeing, and Mike Elson had several GAs on the D line that you look at, and Larry Black was this way. Larry Black was very heavily involved in recruiting. And so because Notre Dame doesn't have sort of the support staff, one thing I think Brian Kelly tried to focus more on was bringing in GAs who can coach, who can help coach and can be guys that can help us. So if I'm Harry Heastand, I need an offensive line GA because I want to work with this side of the line, and I need to trust that the guy over there working with that side of the line is going to be able to teach these kids the things that I believe in that we're trying to get them across. So you're seeing that position evolve. It hasn't had as much of an impact in recruiting nationally, but Notre Dame's been doing this for a while. As you mentioned, Nick Lazinski was that way. You talk to the Adamiolas and some of the older defensive linemen, they'll say that Larry Black had a very important role in getting them to come to Notre Dame and working at Notre Dame. So it's getting more and more prompt. Tommy Reese's first year at Notre Dame, he was the quarterback's coach, but he was a GA because it was the year before the coaching rosters expanded to 10 full-time assistants. So I think if you're smart, you're bringing in a GA that can help you be a recruiter. Now, do I believe you should have a GA that's a recruiter that is your full-time position coach? No, even if it's James Laurinaitis, because the very nature of that position is there's a shelf life on how long you can be a GA, just by rule. So I still felt like Al Golden should have been more involved, and I do think he has learned from that. I think that it came from the standpoint, Tim, of I felt like Al Golden very much wants to just be the defensive coordinator and not necessarily position coach.
I believe that that's true.
And I'm good with that from a on-the-field standpoint when you're able to get Nick because they've now had 3 pretty good GAs in a row, in my opinion, a linebacker. We had Nick Lazinski, and also there was another kid that worked with Rovers who's now, I think, the GA or the DC at Duke. I'm forgetting his last name, but his first name's, I think, Tyler. You remember him, Tim? He was coached the Rovers in Elko's year here, and then he went with Elko to Texas A&M. For the life of me, I can't remember his name. His last name.
You're talking about.
I feel terrible about it because he did a really nice job.
Santucci?
Yes, Tyler Santucci. Yep, just looked it up. So, you look at what the job that Ryan Mahaffey did coaching the receivers when Mike Denbrock was the receivers. Like, it's good to have a guy like that that's coaching and let you be the coordinator. I felt you can't give that guy too much response, or he's the only guy really recruiting linebackers of your defensive staff, because you're going to get into a situation like this. But I think the thing that comes from is Peyton Pierce. And I don't know how much it would have changed. If Al Golden was involved in the Peyton Pierce recruitment, I don't think it would have changed anything. For whatever reason, that kid just was in love with James Laurinaitis. And I don't care if Marcus Freeman was recruiting him or if Al Golden was recruiting him. Peyton Pierce is going to follow James Laurinaitis. That's just the reality.
And we know, like you mentioned Lazinski. I mean, guys love Lazinski, but they didn't back out on Notre Dame because Lazinski left. Laurinaitis is just a little bit different. I think it's a good question. I understand it, but like everybody wants all these support staff guys, and then when they lose a support staff guy, that sucks. I mean, there's a give and take there, and sometimes that's going to happen. It's just,
I think the Peyton Pierce thing was I think people are making this out to be some bigger deal than it is. I think his situation was unique.
I agree with that.
And I've been very critical of Al Golden as a recruiter at Notre Dame. I just don't think that now every time they lose a guy, it's because Al Golden didn't do the right job. I just think this was a unique situation, and I don't know if there's anything Al Golden could have done differently. You're going to not let James Laurinaitis recruit the guy just in case he might leave and take the kid with you. I mean, sometimes things happen, and Notre Dame's done that, Tim.
We cover sports now, and everything it's the blame game.
Right.
This is a very, very, very competitive field, and some people win and some people lose.
Right.
And you win. Like, we tend to ignore the wins,
right?
Like this. Like you lose you have a guy verbally committed, he goes somewhere else, but we forget about the guys that were verbally committed somewhere else and come to Notre Dame. I mean,
we need to be allowed to say, hey, listen, there are times when the staff did something wrong. Kerry Cooks dropped the ball, and that had a big role in why Ronald Darby left. There are times you can point to and say, that guy dropped the ball. I've been very critical of Al Washington as a recruiter. I don't blame him for losing Keon Keeley. I don't think there's a thing he could have done differently other than have a track record like Alabama has of producing first-round NFL draft picks on the D-line. It wasn't NIL, in my opinion. That was a primary reason they lost Keon. Keon was a top NFL draft pick, and the school that gave him the best chance to do that was Alabama. I don't think there's a lot Notre Dame could have done about that one. Other situations, you could say that, and that's the thing that frustrates me, Tim, is not every time you lose a kid, it's because somebody screwed up. Sometimes a kid just chooses to go somewhere else. And then
Larry blow the Peyton Bowen.
No. The only blowing you could say is they should have read the tea leaves sooner and
I agree. Moved. But I mean, you can't.
There's nothing, Tim. You and I know what happened there. There's nothing they could have done differently to get Peyton
every
Bowen.
Time a player plays poorly, it's not all on the position coach.
Right.
This is the field that we're covering here, that we're in, is so competitive that there are wins and losses, and it's not always it's competitive athletics. One team is always going to win. One team is always going to lose. You have to accept that as part of the competitive process.
Right. And that includes recruiting. And I don't care how, look, there are guys that Lou Holtz and his staff went after and lost. Nobody did anything wrong. It's just what I've said is, when you're going to criticize a coach because you see a consistent pattern happening in his position. Like, my criticism of Jeff Quinn were not because this one player didn't pan out. It was a consistent problem that you saw. Harry Hiestand, I thought, was a great coach. He had a hard time finding a right guard in 2016, right? Colin McGovern, you could say, well, that player didn't play well enough, but the coach has a good track record. But even then, every coach makes mistakes. That's kind of my frustration, is like, I'm very critical of certain coaches, but then it's like everything that happens is now that guy's fault. When you see consistent problems at a position, then you can say, hey, this guy's not doing a good job. Chris O'Leary with Peyton Bowen, for example. Chris O'Leary's got to step up and do a better job recruiting. Not because he lost Peyton Bowen, because he didn't land anybody in the 2022 class.
Right.
And because, right. I mean, so, yeah, he's got to step up and do better, but there's nothing Notre Dame could have done differently to get Peyton Bowen. I think the only thing they could have done differently was just have a better backup plan. And, well, okay, they did in Brandon Hillman, but, well, then your backup plan didn't pan out, and you should have had a better sense of where your backup plan was and had you know what I mean? Yeah. But you get into this blame game, and sometimes, like, I have a friend of mine that you and I have the same friend, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I won't say his name. It's like every time they miss out on a kid, it's like, whose fault was this? Like, buddy, it's nobody's fault.
It's competitive
The
athletics.
kid just liked somewhere else better. You know what I mean? Like, it happens sometimes. And that's sometimes it is because a coach dropped the ball. We've seen that. It happens. Sometimes it's because you did everything you can. This just wasn't the right fit for that kid for whatever reason. It's just
Well, maybe the family is influencing the
Sure.
kid more than right.
Sure.
I mean,
Absolutely.
we've seen tons of
Yeah.
evidence of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've said this, Tim. Parents are worse about this NIL stuff than the kids in a lot of instances. I mean, the times where I've seen a kid say, "Well, I don't care about that stuff," and the parents are like, "Yes, you will." You know, I mean, it's been wild. There's a kid that Notre Dame signed last year whose parent was trying to get him to go somewhere else because he was getting a better NIL deal. The kid's like, "No, I want to go to Notre Dame." But yeah, I've had to deal with more crap from parents when it comes to NIL than kids, because kids still, I think deep down, most kids still care about the relationship and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, NIL is a factor, but they understand it. Hey, but this team doesn't. Keon Keeley, perfect example. Did Keon Keeley get NIL money? I think so. Did Keon Keeley not go to Notre Dame because of an NIL deal? I just don't think that that's the case. Knowing him like I know him, there was a lot of other reasons that I don't think Notre Dame could have done. And if Mike Elson was still here, I don't think it changes. I still think Keon Keeley ends up at Alabama. Notre Dame can change things down the road by winning championships and producing more first round. Because why doesn't this happen at the offensive line and tight end, Tim? Why do they rarely lose those guys there? Why? Because they have a track record of producing big time NFL talents at those positions. That will change at defensive line when you haven't had a first round draft pick on the defensive end since 1998 with Ronaldo Wynn. That's why you lost Keon Keeley.
Right.
You know what I mean? If
Well,
that changes, then it helps.
I want to say this about NIL. I'm not saying Notre Dame is going to match other schools dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
They won't do that. Notre Dame is going to be more competitive
Yes.
in NIL moving forward.
Yes.
There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah, I actually think when it's all said and done, NIL, and I've said this all along, NIL eventually, and in some ways it already is, eventually is going to be a net positive for Notre Dame. Even if they're not getting into the paying players thing with NIL or recruits to get enticement to recruits, because I don't believe in that personally. Because this is the thing, Tim, their players have always been getting paid. It's just in the past, Notre Dame could do nothing. Now they at least have something to offer, that's the difference.
Yep.
All right, here's a question from Benjamin Karch. He says, we have heard Coach Parker talk about how he wants to open up the offense this year. What does it look like in your eyes, and what do you hope to see?
Faster tempo, for one thing, in general. More RPOs.
Very much more aggressive down the field, Tim. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah,
we're going to see a much more aggressive offense down the field. Yeah.
With the quarterback that you have in Sam Hartman, absolutely. Those would be, I think, my top three things.
I think we're going to see different personnel this year, but I think that's more related to the specific makeup of your team than something that's necessarily different than what Tommy Rees wanted to do. I think Tommy Rees was a heavy 12 personnel guy the last couple of years because that's where his best players were primarily, where you had the depth you had at tight end. If you didn't use 12 and 13 personnel a lot in 2020, you're not doing your job as a coach. You had Tommy Tremble and Brock Wright would have been a very good 1-2 punch at tight end in 2020. And then you went and brought in this kid named Michael Mayer. You know what I mean? Like, it was personnel driven. It's not necessarily that Tommy Rees's dream in life is to be a 12 personnel's entire life, which is why he and Chancey Stuckey went out and brought in the 4-man class that they brought in a wide receiver, because they want to have more variety. So I think that we'll see more 11 personnel this year, Tim. I think we'll see more 21 and 20 personnel this year. But I think that's more so a change in the makeup of your roster than per se a Jared Parker specific difference, in my opinion.
I would agree. And any coordinator that doesn't, there's so much offense out there now,
right,
that you have to play to your strengths. I mean, would it have made sense to throw the deep ball consistently last year with Drew Pine quarterback, that receiving core? I mean, that's crazy. So I found myself on the defending side of Tommy Rees frequently, because I did think that he was creative, and I thought that he was trying to do things to match his personnel so he could maximize what he had.
Right. So I do think we'll see a little bit of a change there. I mean, I think something I'm curious to see, Tim, that I don't think we have an answer to yet is I'm very curious to see what the run game is going to look like. I think we're going to see the same run schemes that we've seen in the past, but I think the makeup of the volume in which each concept is used is going to change a little bit this year. I just don't know if I would be able to pound the table and say definitively they're going to see more of this and maybe less of this, like I am for RPOs, because I
Yeah,
just think
I,
we
I'm,
haven't seen enough of it.
I'm certainly not in a position to say
Yeah,
they're going to do more of this and that because
yeah,
I just don't know Jared Parker's game that well. Plus, you want to go ahead and try to look at what happened at West Virginia, but
can
it's so foggy as to who was calling what
right,
when that
right.
it was really, I mean, I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time talking to people and trying to decipher that. And the people that I talked to didn't have the answer. Well, hell, if
After
they don't
about
have the answer,
when
then I
Jared
don't.
Parker got hired, Tim, after about 3 conversations, I was like, I'm not watching a single second of West Virginia film. That's how little I felt he was running an offense that he would want
Yeah.
to run.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I'm just not watching the film of that team because I mean, it was so all the people I talked to at West Virginia, and I'm not talking about Notre Dame people trying to, lay down cover for Jared Parker and the offense of West Virginia. I'm talking about people I was talking to at West Virginia. He wasn't running his offense. He was running Neil Brown's offense.
I think there were
And
moments where he was allowed to, but it's
right.
a little bit
But he was allowed to call plays that were from Neil Brown's
right.
offense.
I don't know Neil Brown, but I have to say that there were times where hands were tied.
Yes. Yeah. So the run game thing is we will see a change, Benjamin. I just don't know what it's going to look like. And the change won't be a dramatic, wow, they're running all these different schemes. They're going to still run power. I mean, counter. They're going to still run inside zone. They're going to still run outside zone. They're still going to run duo. And they might throw in like a buck sweep type of scheme. We've seen all of that from Notre Dame under Harry Hiestand. Not as much last year, but like 3 of their long touchdowns in 2017 were off buck sweep. We've seen that before. I don't think it'll look different. Like there won't be schemes like, whoa, what the heck was that concept right there? We've never seen a G-Wrap concept with RPO like Lincoln Riley does at Notre Dame. I don't think it'd be necessarily like that. It'll be more of, oh, they're running more zone this year than last year. Oh, they're still running duo. They're just not as reliant on duo as they were last year. I think it'll be
Don't you think there's going to be more RPO?
Oh, absolutely. RPO, I agree with you on.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was saying is I flat out will tell you there's going to be more RPOs. I'm not as definitive on pounding the table for what the run game is going to look like because I don't know as much. Right. And the full practice we saw, Tim, were blitz periods where you're not running your base offense. You're running blitz beaters. I mean, yesterday was all third down. And so you're running like draws and outside runs. That's not your base run game. So I just don't think I can confidently say for sure it's going to look like this. I just know that anytime you have a shift in coordinator, even if you hand a coordinator the same exact playbook and say you are to make no schematic changes to this playbook, it's going to look different on Saturday because the emphasis on certain concepts is going to be different based on A, what a coach likes, and B, my personnel this year is different than what the personnel was last year. Because guess what? There's this kid that wore number 87 jersey that we don't have anymore.
I do think the playbook is going to be cleaner. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is in talking with Jared Parker, it was like, we've got terminology and concepts that we don't even use anymore that are still being thrown around a little bit. So right. I think the entire playbook is going to be a little bit cleaner, a little bit tidier, and maybe having a better overall concept of okay, this is what we want to do here. This is what we want to do here.
Are you referring to the playbook in regard to what's the volume they take into a season, into games? Because I think the playbook, big picture, is going to look basically the same.
Yeah,
I think it's going to change. They're going to scale down just how much volume of that we're implementing as our base package and then carrying into each week.
I think what you just described is accurate.
Okay. Let's go to the next one here from Josh Miller. He says, if Kenny Minchie was an early enrollee last year, is he starting against USC? Probably not.
I would say probably not.
Yeah, I think the way that team was built, they're just going to run the ball and get the ball to Michael Mayer. I don't know if they would have thrown a freshman out there.
Yeah, we don't know what Kenny Minchie does and doesn't know at this point. Yeah. We know that he's an extremely accurate thrower of the football. I thought it was interesting hearing Gino Guidugli talk about, his pulse, man, is just steady as it goes. He's not up and down, and so you like to hear that. That's a really good thing. But I mean, I don't know where Kenny Minchey is with the deciphering coverages and the playbook, and to think that he would have started ahead of either one of those two guys.
Well, I think the question is once Tyler got hurt, would he have replaced Drew Pine? And as a true freshman, I don't think so. Now, if he was a redshirt freshman and I knew that Kenny Minchey had 3 semesters under his belt, then yeah, I would have been a lot more comfortable because I think he's just more talented, just physically more gifted. But look, Trevor Lawrence was an anomaly. Jalen Hurts was able to lead a team to a national title game as a true freshman because he was, talented, but he was not asked to do much because that team was so loaded. Those guys are not the norm. Putting a true freshman onto the field is not the norm if your desire is to win. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And that team was still trying to go out and win football games, and they had to. Like, there may be years, Tim, where things are just not going right, and we need to develop guys. We've lost 3 games. We need to develop our young guys and get ready for next year. But when you're in year 1 of a coaching staff and you're coming off you're replacing a guy that you did not replace who was fired. You're replacing a guy who went 50 and whatever, 40 and whatever the 4 previous years and left on his own. You have to make sure that you're doing whatever you can to establish a winning culture, even if that means I'm maybe not playing a couple young guys, because we need to make sure that we go out and we're still teaching this team how to win. And I think the thing that they felt late in the year was that in most weeks, Drew Pine running the offense with his experience, being a leader, could get you into the looks you needed to get to go out and use your strengths, which was running the football and getting the ball to Michael Mayer. And that's just where you were. And I don't think there was a freshman that was going to come in unless it was a Dante. If Dante Moore was on the team last year, sure. Yeah, he'd start. If what we think CJ Carr is going to be was a true freshman last year, sure. But those guys are not the norm. And so I still don't think it would have had a whole lot of a difference, in my opinion. Got a question here from Katie Keevers. Is the pressure off Tyler mentally this spring, now having Hartman to be the preconceived starter? Might be easier for him to play better in that scenario. That's an interesting one, Tim, because last year he was the guy that everybody was looking at saying, this is the guy, and Drew Pine was the guy that had nothing to lose. Now, Tyler's in those shoes.
Yeah, I think it's a good I think it's a good question, and my answer is yeah. I think, and we're seeing that from Buckner that he's in the underdog role, and there's he was expected to win. Nobody was surprised when he was named the starting quarterback in August last year. And yeah, I do. I think it's a little bit. He doesn't have that pressure resting on his shoulders, but ultimately, guys are. I mean, if you're a competitor, you accept that. I think that Tyler Buckner's low-key personality has kind of forced him to become a leader or work on becoming a leader. And that didn't necessarily, I think I said earlier about commanding the other 10 guys on the field. That's just not really who he is. But again, when you talk about body language and the way he's carrying himself and throwing the football free and easy, I think that's a good question. I think there's some legitimacy to that.
Yeah. Now, I think the other part too is he's also a year older, just in general, and I think it's like we said earlier. He's building on what began last season, and what began in the week of the preparation, not the week of, but the preparation in the bowl game. I think that's part of it too, Katie. But I think this is going to end up being good for Tyler, because the whole savior thing that people had on him, this notion that he was going to come out and last year and do all these things, I think that pressure's off of him. And I think it's going to be a good thing for him. I really do. Great question, Katie. Here's a comment here from Berkshire Yankee. Says Priester and Samoji, the Ruth and Gehrig of Notre Dame coverage.
Yeah, I'm as old as Ruth, and Lou is old.
He followed up. He said, BD, you can be Joe D, and that ain't bad. I think he was trying to make me feel better because I didn't get included in that group. Well, I'd rather be Mickey Mantle, man. I think Mickey was probably more up my alley than Joe D. But
yeah.
But yes, I agree with that sentiment. And I can say that I've said this before. One of the greatest honors of my professional life was being able to be on the same beat as you and Lou. And not just because of what you guys did, but I've said this before, Tim, so I'm not saying that I haven't said before. But the grace and help that you and Lou both gave me, despite the fact I was a a competitor, which is, a whole different animal in this beat, which drives me nuts. But the way in which you guys helped me along was very much appreciated, and why I had so much respect for you two guys, and why it was such an honor to actually get to work with Lou. And and to it was very meaningful for me. And you and I have talked about this, so that. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know, but
Yeah.
you guys are without question, in my opinion, the Ruth and Garrick of Notre Dame coverage. There's
Well,
no
I
doubt.
appreciate that, Brian. And yes, it was through gritted teeth that I said, "Yes, Brian, I think you should go to my competitor."
Well, I met when I first joined the beat. Before then, just you guys didn't know me from Adam, but you just saw a young guy that was working hard and asking questions, and you guys were so kind to me and gracious to me, and just helping me along to where when I did decide to leave to go to BGI, you were a good enough of a friend to say, "Here's the pros and cons," because that's what you did, Tim. I mean, you gave me pros and cons to what that move would be like, and the cons you gave me were legitimate cons, as I found out when I went over there. But it was an honor to write for the same magazine that I grew up reading, that you and Tim were,
I
you and
appreciate
Lou
that.
were a
No,
part of.
no,
So,
nobody had more grace. Nobody
yeah,
was more gracious than Lou Emoji.
none. The best human being. How many times have you and I talked since then where I've asked you a question or vice versa, and you're like, well, it's another reason I wish Lou was still
Right.
around.
I can't answer that, but Lou could have.
Absolutely. My favorite part of working there was when the SIDs would release some post-game notes, and then Lou would find an error and walk up there and let them know, and they would immediately just correct it. They wouldn't even look it up. They would just correct it because they
Well,
knew Lou was right.
when NBC first started covering Notre Dame, doing the TV broadcast, Lou had a phone sitting next to him in the press box. The phone would ring, and it was NBC wanting a factoid or something that applies to. So Lou was working for us game day, but he was working for NBC a little bit too.
That does not surprise me at all. And as you said, Tim, the thing about Lou is it's not just the mind that he had for this, but he was the most genuinely decent human being that you'll ever meet. And it was so real. I still enjoy I've said this, when people would recognize him and come up and talk to him, the embarrassment he would have, like what, like he genuinely believed, like, why are they trying to talk to me? I'm nobody. And that's just who he was. You and I have a little bit of a different personality when it comes to that.
Yeah, no
This is
doubt about
genuine.
it. Now that doesn't mean that Lou couldn't be a smartass, because he was. He was. He could be very, very cynical,
Yes.
but he was the most gracious human being
Yeah,
I've ever known.
He was. Miss that guy every day. Eric Espinola says, curious to your thoughts regarding Jalen Sneed. I thought he played terrible against South Carolina in the bowl game. He looked out of place and seemed overmatched, especially coming off the edge.
I think Jalen Sneed is, considering a guy played 4 games last year, I think he's right where you want him to be. He has 4 years of eligibility. I don't know that they know exactly how they want to use him quite yet.
That's true.
I'm not sure that there is a definitive answer to that per se, but Jalen Sneed is fine. I realize when a guy's a 5-star, you expect him to hit the ground running and contribute right away. I think he should be very happy now that they didn't use a year of eligibility, although he's probably talented enough that he won't need 5 years anyway.
Right.
But I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Al Golden uses him, because I think that type of athlete, that type of player, I think you're going to see his role expand pretty soon.
You have to find a role for him in some way. And then as he gets more comfortable in that niche role, you give him more and more and more and more. The thing that hurt Jalen too, that I think people need to understand, is Jalen never really played linebacker, a pure linebacker. He played a little bit of rover as a junior, sophomore, and then he was a 3-point stance edge rusher as a junior in high school, and then as a senior was switching between kind of playing in space and being a quarterback for his high school team. So elite physical tools. It's still learning the position, and it'll come. Fortunately, Notre Dame's in a situation where they don't have to throw him out there to be an every down starting linebacker. He can grow into that role. But
he totally was see ball, get ball.
Yes.
Coming out of high school.
Now, one thing I did hear, Tim, and I don't know if you've heard the same, but one thing I heard is before he went out with an injury that's not a damaging, it's not like a torn this or a broken that. But he was. I mean, we've talked to recruits that were at practices. I talked to different sources. As a pass rusher, he was giving them problems. He was giving the offense problems because he's a lot stronger now. He's a year stronger. He's more comfortable because I think Eric was a little bit harsh, saying he was terrible. He certainly had some big mistakes. He just completely gives up a tight end up the seam, but that was smart coaching by South Carolina to say, hey, they got this kid playing in space that's never played before. Let's throw some play actions and some different things at him. He obviously had the one personal foul I thought was warranted. The other one, I still don't know what happened. I just didn't see the play. And so, but he also did some things where you're like, okay, the talent flashes, but he was definitely lost at times in that game. I think that's going to help him. And, I think he's going to be comfortable this year. I think they're going to use him as a niche role early, let him attack. And then as he gets more experience, he'll be more comfortable.
I definitely, and we've heard the same things you have, Brian, that rushing the passer, we're going to see a lot more of that from him.
Yeah. Next question here is David Lowe asked, Brian, is there any chance that Notre Dame goes after the all SEC offensive lineman in the portal from A&M? I saw where he had a Notre Dame offer. It's possible. I mean, I think the stance that Notre Dame has taken, Tim, when it comes to portal offensive linemen is we're not necessarily looking, but if a guy significantly upgrades our room, we'll take a look at it. And, to me, I believe that kid was a center. I believe.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that's going to be the answer.
This is more of a Tom Loy, Kevin Sinclair question for me. I'm aware of this lineman, but I
have not heard anything from my sources that they're looking at him. But this just happened yesterday. I just don't know if recruiting a kid that was good at center and then moving him to guard is necessarily going to make your room that much better. Look, I just think they need to coach up the kids they have. I think that's a position that doesn't lack talent. It's a position that lacks experience. And Joe Rudolph is 9 practices into working with these kids. He's going to learn more about them and have a better feel for how to push the right buttons. I think to me, if they were to, I would feel more, I say this the right way. I would look at it, but I don't know if it's the direction I would go. I'd feel maybe a little bit better if it was a senior, a veteran that was going to be that guy. But I don't know, Tim. There's just most positions I feel like with the portal, I like where Notre Dame is at. If you can get a depth guy, great. But I just say coach the kids you have. You got some talented kids there. Coach them up. Coach up Billy. I don't want to do anything that's going to take reps away from Billy Schrauth. I don't want to do anything that's going to take reps away from Ty Chan or Charles Jagasaw or Sam Pendleton. No, coach those guys up. That's what I'd much rather see.
Brian, are you saying, is this not a one and done guy?
No, he's a freshman. Yeah,
right.
He's a young kid. Right. Yeah, okay. He was which puts Notre Dame in the ball game because Notre Dame can recruit. Like there's this notion that they can only recruit graduate transfers. That's not accurate. They can recruit graduates effectively, and they can recruit guys that are only in like year one relatively easily as long as they were going to class, because the problem is the juniors are guys, it's getting the core classes for the majors to transfer over. They're just not accepting those in a lot of instances. So it's a little harder to get a junior who hasn't graduated. That's why it was a challenge to get, they had to do some things to get Brandon Joseph here. Freshmen that are going to transfer, it's not a big, it's why Alohi Gilman came, because he only had 1 year of classes. So those just basically because they're taking the classes, Tim. What they're having a hard time doing is taking, okay, well, you took these 25 classes towards your major. Well, the program you want to get in here, those syllabuses don't match up. So we'll take the classes, but they're all going to be electives, which puts you off schedule to graduate. And we're not going to take a kid who's not going to graduate.
Yeah. The other problem,
freshman is not an issue.
The other problem is business school accepting transfers.
Right. A freshman, it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah.
So it's a little easier, and that's what I've been told by people in Notre Dame is if a freshman wants to come, we can work with that. That's a lot easier. And again, we've seen this before. Alohi Gilman came to Notre Dame as an undergraduate transfer. He only been 1 year at Navy. It's a little bit different deal because if I'm incorrect on this, you can come as a whatever and then earn your way into the business program if you're just a freshman at Notre Dame. Correct? Is that not accurate?
No, I don't want to speak with 100% certainty about that.
All right, so let's move on. Tyler Smith says, who would you say is the best blocking wide receiver on the roster?
Oh, I think that's pretty easy. Jaden Thomas.
Agree. Andre Tonsel says, do you think, I'll say this, I think Jaden Greathouse is going to eventually be a really good blocker as well. But he's not there yet. I mean, I'm just talking off high school film and things like that. He'll eventually get there, but Jaden Thomas is got grown man size and strength, and he's already established himself as that guy. There's no question. Andre Tonsil says, do you think that Notre Dame is close to getting those players in recruiting who are physically ready to play right away? I think they've upped the game, Tim.
I think
they're not quite where they need to be, but they've upped the game.
They're trending in that direction. It goes back to what I was saying about just the height, the stature of the players that they're recruiting. It's definitely, you're just not going to see a whole lot of 6', 6'1" defensive tackles anymore. Right. I wouldn't think. There are always exceptions to the rule.
And if they're going to be that, they've got to be dudes. I mean, they got to be real dudes, especially guys that are going to come in and play early on. To me, it's kind of a two-way conversation here. Number one is Notre Dame is upping their recruiting game. And as they up their recruiting game, it's going to make it increasingly harder for freshmen to get on the field. Like Georgia this year played, I think, 4 freshmen a lot on defense this year. But that was a bit of an anomaly because they had just lost so many guys from the year before. This year, they won't play as many freshmen. Their recruiting class is still excellent, but they won't play as many freshmen. Clemson had that year in 2018 where they played a bunch of freshmen and sophomores, but then they didn't play that many the next 2 years because they upped their recruiting game. And so as you recruit better consistently, it creates fewer and fewer opportunities for those freshmen to play, where now it's only the truly elite guys. And I think that's ultimately where Notre Dame wants to be, where, even when you look at like 1988, that team had some freshmen that played a bunch. Obviously, Rocket Ismail played, Derek Brown played. Who was the defensive? Arnold Ali was a freshman on that team, right? Yep. But not many freshmen played, even though that was a pretty darn good recruiting class. Not many of those guys played. And even the 1990 team, like they had some of those freshmen played, but a lot of those guys didn't play a ton as freshmen because they were so loaded. And that's ultimately where you want to be, where freshmen are coming in and battling for role jobs. And then eventually those guys leave and I'm ready to step in and be a star. That's what Bama does. That's what Georgia does. That's what Ohio State has done at certain positions where, Marvin Harrison doesn't catch a ton of balls as a freshman. Why? Because you've got Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba ahead of him. But then as year 2, he finally steps in.
Year 2.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where you want to be, right? Is and that was my beef last year with the linebacking core. I had no problem with who they were starting. My only issue was I'd like to see some of those younger guys being used more on special teams and maybe getting in certain specific situations where you're providing a little bit more depth. That's a different debate for a different day, but because I thought it was needed, I want to get to the point where freshmen are not necessarily being counted on. Where I hope this freshman's ready to play, because that's often not a good. It doesn't work out well a lot of times. And we had a question earlier, I think that relates to this too. Is Gideon Rosas, Tim says, are there any prospects in the 23, 24, 25 classes nationally that are as talented as Trevor Lawrence? And this kind of goes back to my original conversation, Tim, is when a freshman comes in and does what Trevor did, then everybody's kind of looking for their Trevor Lawrence. And the reality is those guys just don't come along very often. Those are rare. Like, why Notre Dame didn't have a lot of freshman receivers playing after 1988? Because they weren't Rocket. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of the thing is, no, I don't see anyone in the 23, 24, 25 classes as talented as Trevor Lawrence. I'd say that Bryce Underwood's probably the closest thing to it, but he's still 4 inches, 3-4 inches shorter than Trevor was, and not quite the player that he was. There's a reason those guys are considered generational players, because they just don't come along very often. And so other freshmen should not be held to the standard of, well, this guy wasn't as good as this guy was as a freshman. Well, no kidding. Neither was anyone else. So I say this, well, you lost Jalen Smith. You're not going to have a Jalen Smith next year. You know who else is not going to have a Jalen Smith next year? Everyone in college football, because there just aren't a lot of those type of guys. And that's kind of how I say with Trevor Lawrence is no, as great as next year's quarterback class is, Tim. No, I don't think there's anyone right now as good as Trevor Lawrence.
You're talking unicorns now. Right. I mean, the lasting impression I have of Trevor Lawrence is the ACC championship game, which, speaking of accomplishments by Jack Swarbrick, he got Notre Dame in the ACC during the pandemic here, which is amazing. Although it certainly benefited ACC too, but my forever lasting image of Trevor Lawrence is I'm down on the field before the game, and in walks Trevor Lawrence in his, I think it was a tan suit. It all matched. And here comes this 6'5", 6'6" dude striding across the field looking like he owned the damn place. And I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. We're going to have to face this dude today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a pretty tall task for Notre Dame that
And
night.
that was his junior year, right?
Yeah.
This was his junior year. Yeah. He was a special kid. There just aren't, like somebody mentioned Harold Perkins. Yeah, Harold Perkins is a bit of a unicorn, and there was also a bit of a unique opportunity for him that doesn't always exist at other places. So good question there, Gideon. Ray Holcraft says, do you expect Notre Dame to name a starting quarterback by the end of spring? What are the advantages of naming a starting quarterback by the end of spring practice and advantages of not naming a starting quarterback until the fall? I'll say this, no, they're not going to name a starting quarterback.
That's impossible.
Yeah. It would be unwise to do so.
There's nothing to be gained by it.
Especially if you believe that Tyler Buchner has been at the very least right on par with Sam Hartman. Because everything we talked about at the beginning, Tim, of it's good for Sam Hartman and good for this team that it be perceived that he wins this job. If you name him the start of the end of spring, there's no other justification than saying you just promised it to him. Because he has not outplayed Tyler Buchner, nor do I think Tyler has significantly outplayed Sam Hartman. They both had some good moments and some moments where it's spring, so I think it would be very unwise and could undo a lot of the team building that you're doing as a football team if you go out there and do something like that.
If you name Sam Hartman the starter, Tyler Buchner would be out the door immediately.
Right. And should be. I mean, the way that the spring has gone, I would say that I would understand it. I would be understanding of him deciding to do that. There's just no positives in this particular situation. Ray, take this situation out to answer the second part of your question. The advantage of naming a starting quarterback by the end of spring practice, if you know who it's going to be and it's obvious to the team, you're identifying your leader. That's the advantage of it. You're identifying your leader. This is our guy. And if you know who that's going to be, there's no reason to play around and pretend like you've got a battle if everyone knows who your starting quarterback is going to be. And so there's been times when, okay, we all know who our quarterback's going to be. Let's roll, right? And then other times where it's like, well, we may think we know, but I think last year, from what I was told by sources, Tim, and you may have heard something different, is the staff knew that Tyler Buchner was going to be the starting quarterback, but they wanted to go into fall and still make Tyler continue to work and earn it and still keep Drew in the conversation, things like that. And I have no problem with that because Tyler may have won the job after 15 practices, hypothetically, but there's still 25 practices before the first game. So I think the disadvantage is you're taking the other kid out of the competition, and you're now telling your team that, hey, this is our guy, when you may not be sold on that. So I think that would be the disadvantages of just jumping the gun a little bit. Would be the disadvantage of that. So I think that would be the two ways I would look at that, Tim. Just big picture, not so much directly related to, because we agree this situation, there's no reason to name a starting quarterback right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there are occasions where you want to establish who your leader is going into the summer, but in this day and age where players come and go so easily, you don't want to do anything to rock the boat. I don't see, in this situation, I don't see any advantage with it.
Yeah. Tim, we have Archer 452 is we call him our resident Ohio State fan. He's an Ohio State fan, but he's always in our chat. We love him being a part. We have Alabama fans, Michigan fans, but he has an interesting question. It's two-parter. He says, one of Ohio State's local media blogs, 11 Warriors, just announced a for-profit NIL collective with perks like a Ryan Day podcast, virtual film session with coaches, and passes to practice games. Would you be supportive of one of the Notre Dame outlets doing a similar thing? My first reaction is no. If I'm reading this correctly, I would say no, because I don't think you should get into a situation where you're promoting one outlet over another, in my opinion. I do think what I would say is I think it'd be very cool. I've seen, I forget what coaching staff did this a few years ago, but they brought all the media in, they broke down film with them. I think that'd be great because I always hear like, well, they should be speaking on things. Well, hey, here's a thought. If you want us to speak more intelligently on your offense and defense, how about you bring us in over the summer and let us talk ball with you? You got rid of the coaches clinic, so we can't do that anymore. So if you want us to speak more intelligently on things, how about you let us have some fun? And we can have some fun with it. Promote it, do whatever, do a fundraiser or something like that, whatever you want to do. But I think that'd be pretty cool. And I think something Notre Dame should consider is just letting folks come in and watch some film with them. Say, hey, look, you can't tell people the names of our plays. We're just here to talk ball. We're here to just do a film session, have some fun with it, and connect with you. I think that'd be really cool. And I think that would go over very well if Notre Dame were to do something like that.
Yeah,
But
I really like your notion there. I don't think that's something that we would get involved with. The original question is
yeah,
what you're saying, but yeah, I think it would be great, and it really would be. I mean, it'd be less beneficial for you because of your background in the game, but I mean, it would be really, really beneficial for the other 99% of the people in the business that don't have
well,
the coaching background.
and the benefit would be too is because there's somebody like me and a couple other people is I'd be able to ask some questions that get answers that maybe some of y'all wouldn't think about. I think it'd
No,
be better for the
absolutely.
whole group.
Yeah.
And Tim, I mean, part of the reason I feel like you and Tim were, or you and Lou were so accepting of me is, hey, look, I'm confident in my standing and who I am and what I'm doing that I don't mind helping to lift up someone who's trying to make a name in this business, right? And I think that would be something, that's kind of how I look at it too, is if me being there and my presence could maybe help other people, I never would have thought to ask that question. And that's something I respected about Lou. Lou said, hey, I decided I went to Lou told me this story. He said, I went to a coach's clinic a number of years ago. And I'm listening to this coach talk, and it's like he could have been speaking Mandarin Chinese for all I know. I just had no clue he's talking about. And he realized, like, you know what? There's so much about this game I don't know that I'm going to stay in my lane over here about certain things. And that's what he chose to do, and I respect him for that. But I think that if there's the thing I like about the beat now is there's so many different types of talent on the beat that if I can do something that helps you and you can do something that helps me, then it's going to make the product better for the fans. And that ultimately is what it's about.
Yeah, Lou and I didn't agree on that.
Yeah.
I always wanted to learn more. I
Yeah.
feel like me, like if I have a question, I'll call you up and ask you. I mean, I I don't want to stop learning. I won't.
Yeah.
I will continue to try to learn as long as am in this business because I think it's important. You know, I mean, there was a time when that didn't matter whether
Mhm.
I could talk X's and O's with people. It matters now. It
Mhm.
definitely matters. And I learned, you know, Brian, did you get our recruiting videos? Did we ever talk about this?
Yes.
We used
Yeah,
to
I remember watching the one with Roddy Rodimer and, the Lorenzo kid from Jersey, and, I think Jason Sapp was on that one, Kyle Budensack. I remember that one, yeah.
yeah.
It was the year they got the Carlo Holiday also, I think, was in that
Yeah,
class, and
I
Jared
mean,
Clark, and
I love doing that. I mean,
yeah.
it was prehistoric the way we gathered film on VHS tapes and
But it was considered like, "Wow, this is awesome,"
oh, there's
because
no doubt.
nobody was doing
Bob
this.
Nagel, Bob would be the in studio host
Mhm.
with me. But what I wanted to mention was a guy that was incredibly helpful to me early in my career, like in the 80s, late 80s, was Bob Kamel, who I would actually
Mhm.
sit down and watch film with.
Yeah.
And I really give him a lot of credit for, I think, my ability to do film reviews. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you know, but I'll put my film reviews up against anybody. I mean,
But you
the
have to feel that
full
way, Tim,
body,
otherwise don't do it.
right? The full body of work. I'm not saying I'm right
Yeah.
all the time. Of course, I'm not. We're all wrong, but the full body of work, I'll put that up against anybody that does it. I mean, outside of really great coaches, but Kamel helped me do that. Kamel said, at this position, what he's trying to do here is this. For him to win on this rep, he needs to do that. And then the
Mhm.
other thing was, and this was invaluable too, back in the day during the I started under Jerry Faust, but especially during the Lou Holtz days, every practice was open.
Yeah.
And
So
I
jealous.
could go and stand right by a position. And I can't tell you how many times I went and stood by Joe Moore and listen to him cuss guys out. But more important than that, we always laugh about that, about how salty he could be. But to him, to be around a guy talking technique like
Yeah.
that, Kamel helped me a lot. But what really got me rolling was the ability to stand and listen and watch coaches coach to the point where I felt like, you know what? I mean, I got a pretty good idea of what every position needs to do technique wise in order to succeed.
Yeah. I've had a chance. I actually did a show one time with Coach Kamel. I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times. He's a very open guy. I've always always appreciated my interaction with Coach Kamel. There's no doubt about that. Still around, I believe, too,
I
Tim, right?
remain
Isn't
in
he still?
yes, he is. I
Yeah,
remain
still
in
around.
contact with Bob
Yeah.
Kamel. Yep.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yep.
I think that, but to the point, I think that would be something that'd be a lot of fun, is to have like just sit there and have just in the middle of summer. Hey, you know, we got camp starts next week. Let's sit down and talk some ball. It'd be a lot of fun. As long as there's certain, hey, you can't mention this, you can't, don't mention that, like
Stan would have loved sitting down with the media and talking.
Oh my God, you know what though? I'll give him this, and I don't know if it's because he knew I coached or whatever, but when I would go up to him at clinics and talk ball with him, he was always very receptive to that. But that's also a different environment where this is what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
But as far as like sitting down in no, I don't think that would have gone over well.
No, Harry would not, and Joe Moore wouldn't have either.
Yeah,
he didn't have much. Harry Hiestand is very much a lot like Joe Moore.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and including results.
That too. Yep.
I'm going to go last question here, Tim, before we get out of here. This is from Josh Buffo, the motivational business maker. He says, what Notre Dame quarterback from 2012 to 2022 could have won a title on the 15 or 18 playoff team, and why? I think there's several, actually, in my opinion, if they're on the right team. I think Everett Golson, if he was on the track for that until he got himself in trouble, I think that kind of knocked him off track. I think the whole George Whitfield thing kind of sent him in a different direction than he was trending. I think Malik Zaire is a guy that if he did not get hurt in 2015 as part of that team, I think that team could have been I still say this, and I have no way to back this up, but I think they beat Clemson if Malik's the quarterback on that year. I do. Because they could have done more to run the football in those conditions that year. But and Deshaun Kaiser with a different quarterback coach, maybe one that could kick him in the butt a little bit, is a guy that had the physical tools to do that. I just don't know if Deshaun had the leadership to be a championship quarterback, in my opinion. Whereas if Deshaun had Malik's leadership ability, I think Deshaun has a completely different career.
You think Jack Cohn could have won it?
No, in today's game, no. I think like Jack Cohn, I think Jack Cohn could have run the 2015 Alabama team and led that team. I do. On the right team, let me think about that, Tim. On the right team, yeah, I think Jack Cohn could have a chance to do that. I was a big Jack Cohn guy, Tim. I was very high on Jack Cohn. I just think Jack Cohn was on the wrong team for the first 6 games of last season, of the 2021 season.
Yeah, very true.
He needed. I mean, I've said this: if you put Jack Cohn on this year's football team, they're a much different team because he'd had the line and he'd had enough playmakers to get the ball out to. In my opinion, I think they'd have been a much different team than they were.
I agree with you on Kaiser. I disagree on Zaire. I never thought he was. I agree from the standpoint of the run pass balance or the run component there. I never thought he was accurate enough throwing the football.
I don't think he needed to be in 2015. That would be my only thing is I think in that 2015 he was the perfect quarterback for that team, in my opinion, because what were they in 2015? Run the ball, throw it deep. And that's who they were.
Yeah, that's fair.
On the 2021 team, it's a different conversation because you needed a different element at quarterback. On that 2015 team, that's why I say, Tim, it's got to be the right quarterback on the right team. That's another part of this whole thing.
Yeah, it is.
It's not like, and that's what makes the Trevor Lawrence so good. You can put Trevor Lawrence in any offense other than the triple option, and he's going to be just fine. Other guys need to be okay. Kyler Murray running the Wisconsin offense doesn't look as good as Kyler Murray running the Oklahoma offense. It's still good, but that fits him because of certain physical traits and things like that.
Yeah.
And so to me, Notre Dame hasn't had a guy that was a transcendent player, meaning he was going to make the rest of the team better. They all were guys that needed a little bit of, you put them on the right team. I've said this, I think Everett Golson physically had the best talent of any Notre Dame quarterback.
I was going to bring that up. I mean, I love the way he threw the football.
Yeah. And he was a pocket passer who was athletic.
Absolutely.
When you go watch him play in high school, he could run, but he was, 13,000 yards passing, 120 some touchdowns. I mean, he was beat Jadeveon Clowney in the state championship game. If he didn't get himself out for 2013 and stayed on the path of building on 2012, I think Everett Golson's career would have ended a whole lot different at Notre Dame. And he would have been the starting quarterback in 2015.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Right? I mean, think about that. Think about
Yep.
Everett without the roadblock and what happened to him being a fifth-year senior on that 2015 team with Will Fuller and Chris Brown and Amir Carlisle and CJ Prosise and with the 3 first-round draft picks on the offensive line. That team would have been something. That team could have really been something.
Yeah, I agree.
And it just didn't work out that way.
You've worn me out, Coach D.
I have. I know. We get to the end. You did I'd see you can do a 3-hour show, Tim. You don't realize how long it goes until you look up at the clock and like, holy
Irish
crap.
military won't be doing 3 hours. I can guarantee you that.
Well, Tim, thank you, buddy, so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun blue gold game. I'm very curious to hear kind of what we hear from the big Saturday scrimmage. That's going to be a lot of fun as well. Very much. It's my last Notre Dame fans. It's okay to get excited about this team. We don't know just how good they're going to be, but now's the time to be excited about it. I think from talking to Tim and I, you hear the things that there are to be excited about, but this team is still evolving and still growing. They're going to keep getting better, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. So, Mr. Priester, thank you so much for being with us, everybody. Hit that like button before you get out of here. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And, of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We will talk to you again tomorrow we will have if you think this show is long, wait till you see me and Sean Davis doing a mailbag together. Now that is a marathon. But, Tim, thank you so much for being with us. We'll talk to you again here very soon.
Brian, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Talk to you again, everyone else. We'll see you again here tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast.